The rifle crack split the Nebraska summer like thunder, and 13-year-old Clara Vale threw herself over her brother's body in the scorched grass. Blood soaked through wounded rancher Elias Crowley's shirt as he aimed back at the riders hunting two children across the frontier, children whose own uncle wanted them dead for an inheritance. In 3 seconds, Elias could ride away and save himself, or he could pull that trigger and lose everything. This is their story. If you want to see how a broken cowboy, 2 hunted kids, and a burning barn forged the most unlikely family the West ever knew, stick around until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The heat didn't just sit on the Nebraska prairie that August afternoon. It pressed down like a boot on a man's throat. Elias Crowley figured he had maybe an hour before his horse gave out completely, and maybe 2 before the bullet wound in his side finished what the card cheat in Omaha had started 3 days ago. He'd stopped caring about either. The blood had soaked through his shirt and vest, tacky now in the brutal sun, and every breath felt like someone was working a knife between his ribs. His canteen had run dry 6 miles back. The prairie grass stretched endless and yellow in every direction, broken only by the skeletal remains of a burned-out homestead to the west and the vultures making lazy circles overhead. 38 years old, 11 years alone. This seemed like a reasonable place to die. Then he heard the girl scream. Not a scream of surprise or fear. This was rage, pure and primal, the sound of something wild backed into a corner. Elias pulled his horse up short, ignoring the fresh bolt of pain that shot through his side. His hand dropped to the colt on his hip out of instinct, even though he wasn't sure he had the strength to draw it. The scream came again, closer now, from somewhere in the tall grass to his left. "Get back!" A girl's voice, high and fierce. "I swear I'll bash your head in." A man's laughter rolled across the prairie, mean and confident. "You gonna do that with a stick, girl? Come on now, your uncle just wants to talk." "My uncle can go straight to hell." More laughter, multiple voices now, at least 3 men, maybe 4. Elias should have kept riding. Any sensible man would have. Whatever was happening in that grass wasn't his concern, wasn't his problem, wasn't his... The crack of a rifle shot made his horse shy sideways. That was a warning. A different voice, older, with the flat authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Next one takes the boy. Now get up and walk back here before I lose my patience." Silence. Then a sound that made something crack open in Elias's chest. A little kid crying, trying hard not to, the kind of crying that came from pure terror. Elias closed his eyes, saw his own son's face for just a flash. Michael, who never made it to his first birthday, who'd been in the ground for 11 years alongside his mother. Saw the tiny grave markers he'd carved himself before riding away from that life forever. He opened his eyes. "To hell with it," he muttered, and turned his horse toward the voices. The grass stood chest high on a mounted man here, thick and yellow and rustling in the hot wind. Elias could see where it had been trampled, a trail of broken stalks leading toward a small clearing maybe 30 yards ahead. He could hear them clearly now, though he couldn't see them yet. "I'm done asking nice," the older voice again. "Tommy, grab the boy." "No!" The girl's voice cracked. "Don't you touch him." "Then drop that stick and come here." Elias nudged his horse forward, slow and quiet. His side screamed at him with every movement. He could feel fresh blood soaking through the makeshift bandage he'd tied that morning. He broke through the grass into the clearing and took it all in with one sweep, 4 men on horseback forming a loose circle around 2 kids pressed back to back in the center. The girl couldn't have been more than 13, skinny as a fence post, dark hair wild around her face, gripping a broken tree branch like a club. The boy behind her was maybe 5, silent now, but trembling hard enough that Elias could see it from 15 feet away. The men were exactly what he'd expected, range trash dressed up nice, the kind who hired out their guns and their silence. 3 of them looked like standard hired muscle. The 4th man, the older one, sat his horse like someone who'd spent time in a real saddle. He had papers rolled up in one hand and a rifle resting across his saddle horn. All 4 of them turned to look at Elias. "Keep riding, friend." The older man's voice stayed level, but his hand shifted on the rifle. "Private family matter here." Elias said nothing. He just sat his horse, swaying slightly, and tried to keep his vision from blurring at the edges. The girl's head whipped around. Her eyes went wide when she saw the blood soaking Elias's shirt. You hurt bad, mister? One of the hired guns, a stocky man with a cruel mouth, grinned. Maybe you should find a doctor instead of sticking your nose where it don't belong. Maybe. Elias's voice came out rougher than he intended. Or maybe you should explain why 4 grown men need rifles to have a conversation with 2 kids. The older man's jaw tightened. Like I said, family matter. These children belong to their uncle. I'm here legal-like to bring them home. That right? Elias looked at the girl. This your uncle? No! She spat the word. Our uncle's name is Marcus Vale. He left us alone after Mama died. Didn't want us then. Now he's sending these animals after us because... Shut your mouth, girl. The older man cut her off. Your uncle has legal custody rights. These papers say so. Those papers don't mean anything, and you know it. The girl's voice shook with fury. He just wants the land rights. He doesn't care about us. Elias felt something shift in his gut. Land rights, of course. It was always land or money, or both. Legal custody. He looked back at the older man. So why the rifles? Because these 2 ran off in the night. Been tracking them for 3 days. The girl's wild, and the boy... He gestured with the rifle barrel. Well, you can see the boy ain't right in the head. Hasn't said a word in months. Uncle Marcus is real worried about them. Uncle Marcus can rot, the girl hissed. The stocky hired gun had apparently had enough talking. His hand dropped toward his pistol. We're wasting time, Pritchard. This bleeding saddle tramp can't even sit his horse straight. Let's just... Elias's Colt cleared leather faster than his wounded body had any right to move. The clearing went silent, except for the wind in the grass. 4 guns against 1, and Elias was already shot, already dying probably, but his hand was steady, and the Colt was aimed directly at Pritchard's chest. In his peripheral vision, he could see the other 3 men frozen mid-draw. Here's what's going to happen. Elias's voice dropped low. The same voice he'd used 11 years ago when he was a different man who gave orders to different men in different fights. You're going to put those rifles across your saddles, slow. Then you're going to turn around and ride back to whoever's paying you. And if I see any of you near these kids again, I won't bother with conversation first. Pritchard didn't move. His eyes calculated distances, odds, angles. You're bluffing. You can barely stay conscious. Maybe. But I guarantee I'll kill you before I fall. Elias thumbed the hammer back. The click was very loud. And I really don't have much to lose today. Something in his voice must have sold it, because Pritchard's face changed. He saw the truth. This bleeding stranger wasn't afraid of dying, wasn't afraid of anything, which made him the most dangerous man in the clearing. This ain't over, Pritchard said slowly. He raised his rifle carefully and laid it across his saddle. Marcus Vale has legal rights to these children. He'll have the law on you. Let him try. The other 3 men were already backing their horses away, eager to get clear of a situation that had turned bad. Pritchard held Elias's gaze for another long moment, then finally nodded once. Your funeral, friend, and it'll be soon, by the look of you. They turned their horses and rode back into the tall grass. Elias kept the Colt trained on Pritchard's back until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did he let the gun drop. The girl was staring at him like he'd appeared out of thin air. Who are you? She whispered. Elias tried to answer, but the world tilted sideways. He had just enough time to think, well, that was stupid before he fell off his horse and the scorched Nebraska grass came up to meet his face. He woke up to pain and the smell of wood smoke. For a confused moment, Elias thought he was back home. The real home. The one from before. Where Sarah would be cooking supper and Michael would be sleeping in his cradle. Then reality crashed back in, and he remembered. Sarah was dead. Michael was dead. Home was gone. And he'd just done something phenomenally stupid for 2 kids he'd never seen before. He forced his eyes open. He was lying on his back in the grass, and the sun had moved considerably lower in the sky. His wound had been bandaged, crude work, but better than what he'd managed himself. Someone had built a small fire a few feet away. The girl sat beside it, watching him with dark, wary eyes. The little boy was curled up asleep next to her, using her leg as a pillow. You passed out, the girl said flatly. Lost a lot of blood. Elias tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. The world spun. Don't. She didn't move to help him. You open that wound again, you'll bleed out for sure. He fell back, breathing hard. Where are we? Same place. I couldn't move you far. She poked at the fire with a stick. Figured they might come back, so I kept watch. Your brother? Ben. He's 5, and he's not... She paused, choosing words carefully. He hasn't talked since Mama died, 4 months ago. But he ain't simple or nothing. He just stopped. Elias looked at the sleeping boy, painfully thin, wearing clothes that had been mended multiple times, dark hair like his sister's. His face was streaked with old tear tracks and prairie dust. What's your name? Elias asked. Clara Vale. She said it with defiance, like she expected him to challenge it. I'm 13, old enough to take care of us both. Doing a fine job so far. It came out harsher than he'd intended, but Claire's face hardened instead of crumpling. We made it 3 days, didn't we? 3 days on foot with nothing but what we could carry. And we would have made it further if you hadn't... She stopped. Why'd you help us? Elias didn't have a good answer for that. Because he was dying anyway? Because he'd heard a little boy crying? Because for one moment he'd seen his own son's face? Seemed like the thing to do, he said finally. Well, it was stupid. Claire's voice was blunt. You're hurt bad. We don't have medicine or a doctor or anything. And those men will come back. Maybe not tonight, but soon. With more men, and legal papers that say Uncle Marcus owns us. Does he? Own you? Clara's jaw tightened. Mama made him our guardian before she died. She didn't know... She didn't realize... She swallowed hard. Uncle Marcus came to the funeral, looked at the house, looked at the land, asked about Mama's family money, then he left. Told us he'd send for us when he got situated. That was 4 months ago. No money, no food, nothing. We were going to starve in that house. So you ran? No. So I worked. Pride flashed in her eyes. I cleaned houses, did washing, anything I could. Kept us fed. Kept us together. Then last week Uncle Marcus shows up out of nowhere with those men and papers saying he's taking us to Omaha. Says he's got a situation that needs settling and we're part of it. Her voice dropped. I heard them talking. Uncle Marcus owes money to some businessman. Bad money. And apparently there's a trust from Mama's side of the family. Money that comes to Ben and me when we turn 18. But if we die before that... It goes to your uncle, Elias finished. Clara nodded. So I took Ben and I ran. Again. And I'll keep running until I'm old enough that the law says I can take care of us myself. You got a plan? Had one. There's a town called Clearwater about 40 miles west. Mama had a friend there, Mrs. Delaney. I thought maybe... She trailed off, looking at the darkening prairie. But those men are tracking us, and now you're bleeding all over the grass because of us. Elias closed his eyes. 40 miles. He'd never make it. Hell, he probably wouldn't make it through the night. Listen, Clara said quietly. When you can't ride anymore, just tell me which direction. Ben and I will keep going. We're used to it. You're 13. So? So you're a kid, both of you. Elias forced himself up on one elbow, ignoring the bright spike of pain. You can't just walk across the frontier alone. We made it 3 days. And then what? 3 more days? 3 weeks? You think you can outrun grown men on horses forever? He shook his head. They'll catch you, and when they do, I'll handle it. Clara's voice went cold. I've handled worse. Something in the way she said it made Elias go quiet. This girl had seen things, bad things, the kind of things that made a 13-year-old sleep with her boots on and learn to build a fire with shaking hands. My ranch is 8 miles north, he heard himself say. Clara's eyes narrowed. So? Elias wasn't sure where this was going, only that walking away felt wrong in a way he couldn't name. So maybe you and your brother stay there. Few days? Let me heal up. Then we figure out the next move. Why would you do that? Because I'm not leaving 2 kids alone on the prairie to get hunted down. You don't even know us. Don't have to. Clara stared at him for a long moment. You got a wife at this ranch? Kids? No. Then why do you care? The question hit harder than she knew. Elias looked at the sleeping boy, at this fierce girl trying so hard to be stronger than the world demanded. He thought about Michael, about the son he'd buried, about the man he'd been before grief hollowed him out. I don't know, he admitted, but I do. Clara was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. If we go to your ranch, she said finally, and those men find us there, they'll burn it down. They'll kill you. They'll try. You can barely sit up. I've been worse. That's not an answer. Elias met her eyes. Clara, I'm not your uncle. I'm not going to promise you safety or money or a future. All I've got is a falling down ranch and about 8 good years left on my horse. But if you and Ben need a place to sleep tonight where nobody's hunting you, I'm offering it. What you do after that is your choice. Clara looked at her sleeping brother. Her hand moved unconsciously to smooth his hair back from his forehead, a gesture so maternal and protective that it made Elias's chest tight. One night, she said, then we're gone. Fair enough. And if you try anything, I won't. I'll bash your head in with that stick. I meant it before and I mean it now. Despite everything, the pain, the blood loss, the absolute insanity of what he'd just committed to, Elias almost smiled. Fair enough. They rode slowly through the darkening prairie. Elias hunched over his horse's neck, Clara sitting behind him with Ben pulled tight against her chest. The boy still hadn't spoken, hadn't even acknowledged Elias's presence beyond one quick, terrified glance. He just clung to his sister and stared at nothing. The ranch appeared out of the gloom like a memory half forgotten. Small house, leaning barn, corrals that needed mending. Elias hadn't been here in 3 weeks. He'd been in Omaha chasing a rumor about work, which had turned into a card game, which had turned into a knife fight in an alley that left him shot and broke, and heading home to die in peace. Instead, he was bringing home 2 kids and a pile of trouble. It's not much, he said as they approached. Clara didn't answer. She was scanning the darkness like she expected those men to come charging out of it any moment. Elias slid off his horse, barely controlled fall, really, and managed to stay on his feet through sheer stubbornness. He tied the horse and reached up for Ben. The boy flinched back. Ben. Clara's voice was gentle. It's okay. Come on. Ben looked at Elias with huge dark eyes. Then slowly, carefully, he let himself be lifted down. He weighed almost nothing. The house was dark and cold. Elias fumbled for matches while Clara stood in the doorway, still holding Ben's hand, ready to run at the first sign of danger. Light bloomed from the oil lamp. The interior of the house appeared exactly as he'd left it, sparse, clean, empty. One room for living and cooking, one small bedroom, a loft for storage. No pictures on the walls, no personal items anywhere. It looked like a place someone was camping, not living. Clara took it all in with a glance. You live here alone? Yep. How long? 6 years, give or take. Where's your family? Dead. The word came out flat. Clara's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture, a recognition, maybe. This man understood loss, too. There's beans in the cupboard, Elias said, moving toward the bedroom before his legs gave out. And some dried meat. Help yourself. Where are you going? To lie down before I fall down. Your wound? I've done what I can with it. Either I heal or I don't. He paused in the bedroom doorway. You can take the bed out here. I'll be fine where I am. What about Clara? He turned to look at her. You're safe tonight. I promise. Get some sleep. He closed the door before she could argue. Elias didn't sleep. He lay on the narrow bed in his room, listening to Clara move around the main room, heard her rummaging through cupboards, the clink of a pot, the low murmur of her voice as she talked to Ben, heard Ben's silence in response. An hour later, a gentle knock. Come in. Clara pushed the door open. She held a bowl of beans and a cup of water. You need to eat something. Not hungry. Don't care. Eat anyway. She set the bowl on the small table beside the bed. And drink. You lost a lot of blood. Elias pushed himself up with effort. The wound pulled and burned. Clara watched him struggle but didn't offer help. Smart girl, knew he'd refuse it anyway. Ben asleep? He asked. Finally. He was scared. She paused. Still is. Of me? Of everything. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, uninvited, and started pulling at a loose thread on her sleeve. He used to talk all the time. Never shut up, actually. Drove Mama crazy. Then she got sick and he just stopped. One day he was chattering about birds or clouds or whatever, and the next day nothing. Hasn't said a word since. Doctors look at him? Couldn't afford a doctor, couldn't afford much of anything. She looked around the sparse room. You got any family at all? Anyone who checks on you? No. Friends? No. So you just sit out here alone for 6 years? That's about the size of it. Clara studied him with those two old eyes. What happened to them? Your family? Elias took a sip of water to buy time. Wife died in childbirth. Son died 3 days later. Fever. How long ago? 11 years. And you've been alone ever since? More or less. Clara was quiet for a moment. That's a long time to be angry. The observation was so sharp, so accurate, that Elias actually flinched. What makes you think I'm angry? Because I am. About Mama, about Uncle Marcus, about all of it. She met his eyes. And you got that same look. Like the world owes you something it's never going to pay back. Smart girl. Too smart. Eat your beans, she said, standing up. I checked your bandages. They're holding for now, but if you start bleeding again in the night, wake me up. Clarice, what? He wanted to say something meaningful, something that would explain why he'd risked his life for two strangers. But the words wouldn't come. So instead he just said, "Thank you for the food." She nodded once and left, closing the door quietly behind her. Elias sat in the darkness, listening to the wind howl across the prairie outside. For the first time in 11 years, his house didn't feel completely empty, and that terrified him more than any hired gun ever could. He woke to the smell of coffee. For a disoriented moment, Elias thought he was dreaming. Sarah used to make coffee first thing every morning, strong and dark, and the smell would drag him up from sleep. Then he remembered where he was and what had happened, and he forced his eyes open. Daylight streamed through the window. His side hurt like hell, but the bandages were dry. He'd made it through the night. Elias pushed himself upright, biting back a groan, and made his way to the main room. Clara was at the stove, working with the efficiency of someone who'd been cooking for herself for a long time. Ben sat at the table, coloring something with a stub of charcoal on a scrap of paper. Both children looked up when Elias appeared. Morning, Claire said. Coffee's ready. Figured you'd need it. Where'd you find... You had some in the tin. Not much, but enough. She poured him a cup without asking. And I found eggs. Your chickens are half wild, but I managed. Elias took the coffee. It was good, better than he usually made. You didn't have to... We're not charity cases. Clara's voice was firm. We eat your food, we work for it, that's how it goes. Clara, you're kids. I'm 13 and I've been taking care of Ben for 4 months. I can cook and clean and do washing and mending. I'm strong enough to carry water and chop kindling. And Ben's good with animals. He can feed chickens and collect eggs better than most grown folks. Elias looked at Ben, who was studiously focused on his charcoal drawing. He always this quiet? Since Mama died, yeah. Clara's voice went soft. But he hears everything, understands everything, just doesn't talk. Elias nodded slowly. He pulled out a chair and sat, carefully, because his side screamed at the movement. Ben glanced at him, then back at his drawing. What are you making there? Elias asked. Ben didn't answer, but he slowly turned the paper so Elias could see. A horse, surprisingly well drawn for a 5-year-old, standing in grass under a big sun. That's real good, Elias said honestly. Ben's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. They ate breakfast in relative silence. Clara watched Elias like a hawk, clearly cataloging every wince, every careful movement. When he reached for the coffee pot and almost couldn't manage it, she was there first, refilling his cup without comment. You should rest today, she said. That wound needs time. Can't. Got chores, which Ben and I will handle. Clara's tone left no room for argument. You tell us what needs doing, we'll do it. You try to work and tear that wound open, you'll be useless to everybody. She was right, and they both knew it. Fine, Elias said, but we need to talk about what happens next. Clara's face closed off immediately. We're leaving, said we would. Where? That's not... Clara, those men know roughly where you are. They'll be looking, And 40 miles to Clearwater on foot with a little boy? He shook his head. You won't make it. We'll figure it out. Or you could stay here. We talked about this. I know what we talked about. Elias set down his cup. And I'm saying it different now. Stay. Not just one night. Stay until we can figure out something that doesn't end with you and Ben dead in a ditch. You don't owe us anything. I know. Then why? Because I've got a ranch that needs work, and two good hands sitting right here. He looked at Ben, then back at Clara. You said you're not charity cases. Fine. Work for your keep. Help me get this place running right. And in return, you get shelter and food while we figure out the legal mess your uncle's made. Clara stared at him. You're serious. As a funeral. What happens when those men come back? Because they will. Then we deal with it. They'll kill you. They'll try. Elias met her eyes. Clara, I've got nothing to lose. You understand that? This ranch, this life. It's just me waiting to die anyway. Has been for 11 years. But you and Ben, you've got futures. You've got reasons to keep fighting. So let me help you fight. Something shifted in Clara's expression. Surprise maybe, or hope, trying not to hope. You really mean that? I really do. She looked at Ben, who was watching them both with wide, solemn eyes. Then she looked back at Elias. 2 weeks, she said finally. We stay 2 weeks. Help get your ranch in order. Figure out our next move. But if those men show up before then, we handle it together. Ben and I run. Immediately. No arguments. Fair enough. Clara stuck out her hand. Deal. Elias shook it. Her grip was strong, her palm calloused from work. This was a girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast, too hard. Just like him, all those years ago. They spent the rest of the morning working. Clara proved herself tougher than most ranch hands Elias had known, hauling water, mending fences, mucking out stalls without complaint. Ben followed her everywhere, silent but observant, helping where he could. The boy had a way with animals, just like Clara said. The half-wild chickens that usually scattered at Elias's approach let Ben walk right up and take eggs from under them. By mid-afternoon, Elias's wound was screaming at him to rest. He sat on the porch, pretending to oil his saddle while actually just trying to stay conscious. Clara appeared with more water and a hard look. Inside, now. I'm fine. You're bleeding through your shirt again. Inside. He went. Clara made him lie down while she changed his bandages with steady, practiced hands. Where the hell had a 13-year-old learned field medicine? Mama taught me, Clara said, reading his expression. She was sick for a while before she died. Needed help with everything. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but her hands trembled slightly. I got good at bandages and medicine and keeping things clean. Your mama would be proud. Clara's hands stilled. For just a moment, her face crumpled, showing the scared child underneath all that fierce determination. Then she locked it down again, tying off the bandage with sharp, efficient movements. Rest, she ordered. I mean it. Yes, ma'am. She almost smiled at that. That night they ate together at the table, salt pork and beans, and the last of the bread Clara had somehow made from Elias's meager supplies. Ben ate slowly, methodically, still not speaking. Clara kept glancing at the windows, clearly listening for the sound of approaching horses. They won't come at night, Elias said. Too easy to get lost on the prairie in the dark. You sure about that? No, but it's likely. Clara nodded. After a moment she said, Tell me about your ranch. Before. When you had your family. Elias went still. He hadn't talked about Sarah and Michael in, he couldn't remember how long, years. It was different then, he said finally. Had more cattle, garden out back. Sarah was, he paused, searching for words. She was good at making things feel like home. Pictures on walls, flowers in jars, singing while she cooked. He stared at his plate. After she died, I got rid of all of it. Couldn't stand to look at it. And your son? Michael. He didn't even get a chance. Elias's voice went rough. 3 days old. Fever took him so fast I couldn't. There was nothing I could do. Clara was quiet for a long time. I'm sorry. Me too. Is that why you helped us? Because of him? Elias looked at Ben, who was pushing beans around his plate, listening to every word. Maybe. Or maybe I was just tired of being alone. The truth of it surprised him, but there it was. After dinner, Ben fell asleep on the floor near the stove, clutching a tin toy horse he'd produced from somewhere. Clara covered him with a blanket, then came to sit across from Elias. "That horse," she said quietly, "that's the only thing he saved from home. Wouldn't let go of it the whole way here." "Your mama give it to him?" "No, it was his daddy's. Papa died when Ben was just a baby. Fell from a horse, broke his neck." Clara touched the toy gently. "Mama said Papa used to carry it for luck. Now Ben won't let it out of his sight." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Clara tensed. "Just wind," Elias said. "You sure?" "Sure enough. Sure." But he went to his room and came back with his rifle anyway, set it against the wall within easy reach. Clara noticed but didn't comment. "You should sleep," he told her. "I'll keep watch first half of the night." "You're still healing, and you're exhausted. Sleep. I'll wake you if anything happens." Clara looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She curled up next to Ben on the floor. She wouldn't take the bed, no matter how many times Elias offered. And within minutes, her breathing evened out. Elias sat in his chair with the rifle across his knees, watching the darkness outside and listening to two children sleep in his house. For the first time in 11 years, the silence didn't feel like death. It felt like maybe, just maybe, something worth protecting. 3 days passed. Clara and Ben settled into the ranch like they'd always been there. Clara proved herself invaluable. She could cook, clean, mend, work. Ben helped with the animals and even started doing little repairs around the property with tools Elias showed him how to use. The boy never spoke, but his eyes were bright and watchful. He was learning. Elias found himself healing, not just the wound which was slowly closing, but something deeper. Having people in his house again, having purpose beyond just surviving another day, it did something to him he couldn't quite name. On the fourth morning, Clara found him checking the fence line on the north pasture. "You're moving better," she observed. "Wounds healing. You did good work." "I'm a decent field medic, not a miracle worker." She leaned against a fence post. "How much land you got here?" 160 acres, most of it's decent grazing." "And you work it alone?" "Mostly. Sometimes hire day labor from town during roundup." He looked at her. "Why?" "Just thinking. This is good land. You could do more with it if you had help." "Clara, I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. "Just observing." But there was something in her voice. Hope, maybe. The hope of a girl who'd been running for so long she'd forgotten what staying felt like. That afternoon, Elias taught Clara to shoot. She fought him on it at first, insisted it was unnecessary, but he was firm. "If those men come back, you need to be able to protect yourself and Ben. Non-negotiable." So they went out to the back pasture with 3 old bottles and Elias's spare pistol. Clara held the gun like it might bite her. "It's not going to hurt you," Elias said. "Just loud. See that bottle on the left? Aim for center mass and squeeze slow." Clara's first shot went wide. So did her second. Her third clipped the bottle. "Good," Elias said. "Again." By the time the sun started setting, she'd hit 4 out of 6 bottles. Not expert marksmanship, but enough to make a man think twice. "You're a natural," Elias told her. Clara looked at the gun in her hand. "I don't like it." "You don't have to like it. You just have to be able to use it." They walked back to the house together. Ben was waiting on the porch, his tin horse clutched in both hands. When he saw Clara with the gun, his eyes went wide. "It's okay, Ben," she said gently. "Just learning, just in case." Ben looked at Elias, really looked at him, for maybe the first time. There was a question in those eyes. "Are you keeping us safe?" "I am," Elias said, even though Ben hadn't spoken. "I promise." Ben nodded slowly. Then, incredibly, he reached out and took Elias's hand. Just for a second, just long enough to say "I believe you" without words. Elias's chest went tight. On the 5th night, they came. Elias woke to his horse screaming in the barn. He was on his feet with his rifle in hand before his mind fully caught up, pain from his wound forgotten. He burst into the main room to find Clara already up, pulling Ben behind her, her eyes wild. "Stay here," Elias ordered. "Lock the door behind me. If shooting starts, you get Ben out the back window and you run. Understand?" "Elias, understand?" Clara's jaw set. "Yes." He went out the front door into chaos. The barn was on fire. Not fully, not yet, but flames were licking up one side, and in the flickering light Elias could see 3 men on horseback circling the property. Not Pritchard and his crew. These were different men, rougher, meaner. One of them saw Elias and laughed. "There he is, the bleeding hero!" Elias didn't bother with warnings. He raised the rifle and fired. The bullet took the laughing man clean off his horse. The other 2 scattered, one circling toward the back of the house, one disappearing into the darkness. Elias ran for the barn. If the fire spread to the hay, the whole thing would go up, and he'd lose everything. He could hear his cattle bellowing in panic from the far pasture. He made it 3 steps before someone tackled him from the side. They went down hard. Elias's wound tore open, and he felt hot blood soaking through his shirt. The man on top of him, one of the riders, had a knife, was bringing it down toward Elias's throat. The gunshot cracked like thunder. The man jerked, blood blooming on his shoulder, and fell sideways. Elias rolled away and looked up to see Clara on the porch, the spare pistol trembling in her hands, her face white as bone. She'd shot a man. No time to process it. Elias grabbed his rifle and ran for the barn. The fire was spreading fast now, eating up the old dry wood. He grabbed buckets, started hauling water from the trough, throwing it on the flames while smoke choked his lungs. Another gunshot from the house. Clara again. Then Ben screamed. Elias dropped the bucket and ran. He burst through the front door to find the 3rd rider inside, holding Ben by the collar, a gun to the boy's head. Clara stood frozen 5 feet away, her pistol trained but her hands shaking too hard to shoot. "Drop it," the man snarled. "Drop it or I blow his brains all over your nice floor." "Let him go," Elias said quietly. "Make me." Ben was crying silently, tears streaming down his face. His tin horse dropped on the floor. His eyes found Elias's, pure terror, but also something else. Trust. Elias looked at Clara, looked at Ben, looked at this man who thought he could come into Elias's home and threaten children. Something inside him broke. Or maybe something that had been broken for 11 years finally healed. "Last chance," Elias said. "Let the boy go." The man laughed. "Or what? You'll—" Elias shot him through the heart. The man dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Ben stumbled forward and Clara caught him, pulling him close, both of them shaking. Elias stood there with the rifle still raised, watching the body bleed out on his floor, and felt absolutely nothing. "Is he—" Clara couldn't finish the question. "He's dead." Elias lowered the rifle. "Are you too hurt?" Clara shook her head. Ben was silent, clinging to his sister. "Good." Elias walked past the body without looking at it. "The barn's still burning. I need to—" "Elias," Clara's voice was small. "I shot that man outside." "I know. I didn't mean to kill him. You protected your family. That's what you did." He looked at her. "And you did it well." "But no buts. This is what the world is sometimes, Clara. Ugly and hard and full of people who'll hurt you if you let them." He could see she was about to cry, to break down, so he gentled his voice. "You did good. You hear me? You saved my life." Clara nodded, tears spilling over despite her best efforts. Elias wanted to comfort her, to hug both of them and tell them it would be okay. But the barn was burning, and there was a dead man on his floor, and 2 more outside, and the night wasn't over yet. "Stay inside," he said. "I'll handle the rest." He went back out to fight the fire alone. By dawn, it was finished. The barn was half destroyed but standing. 3 men were dead. Elias's wound had torn open again, and he could barely stand, but somehow he was still alive. Clara appeared beside him as he stared at the smoking ruins. She didn't say anything, just stood there, steady and present. "They'll send more," she said finally. "Uncle Marcus won't stop." "I know." "You could still tell us to leave. Save yourself all this trouble." Elias looked at the house where Ben was probably still hiding, traumatized and silent. Looked at this girl who'd been forced to shoot a man to protect her family. "No," he said. "I couldn't." Clara was quiet for a moment, then, "Why?" "Because you're not just some runaway kids anymore." The words came out rough but true. "You're my responsibility now, and I don't walk away from that." Since when? Since right now, Clara laughed, a single broken sound. You're crazy, you know that. Probably. They stood together watching the sun rise over the scorched prairie, two people who'd found something worth fighting for in the ashes and the blood. Behind them, the house waited, damaged but standing, just like all of them. The town of Clearwater didn't want anything to do with dead bodies before breakfast. Sheriff Hackett stood in Elias's front yard 3 hours after sunrise, hands on his hips, staring at the three corpses laid out in a row like cordwood. He was a tired-looking man in his 50s with a gray mustache and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. So let me get this straight, he said slowly. These three rode onto your property in the middle of the night, set fire to your barn, and tried to kill you. That's about the size of it, Elias said. And you killed all three of them yourself. The girl got one of them, shoulder wound. I finished him. Hackett's eyes flicked to the house where Clara and Ben were watching through the window. The girl, the 13-year-old girl. She was protecting her brother from men with guns and knives who came to burn you out. Hackett rubbed his face. And you have no idea who sent them? Elias met his gaze steadily. I got a pretty good idea. Care to share? Not particularly. Hackett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Elias, I've known you 6 years. You keep to yourself, don't cause trouble, pay your taxes on time. But now you got 2 kids living here that ain't yours, dead men on your property, and a half-burned barn. People in town are going to talk. Let them talk. It ain't that simple. There's already been inquiries. Man came through 2 days ago asking questions about runaway children. Had papers saying he was acting on behalf of their legal guardian. Marcus Vale. That's the name. Hackett looked uncomfortable. Look, I don't know the full story here, and maybe I don't want to, but if Vale's got legal custody papers, those papers don't mean anything if he's trying to kill his own kin. You got proof of that? Elias gestured at the bodies. Right there. These men got nothing on them that ties them to Marcus Vale. No letters, no payment records, nothing. For all I can prove, they were just drifters looking to rob an isolated ranch. Hackett's voice was gentle but firm. And that's how I'm going to write it up. Self-defense against unknown assailants. But Elias, next time you might not be so lucky. And those kids aren't going anywhere. Even if the law says different, Elias's hand drifted toward his pistol without him meaning it to. Hackett noticed and sighed. I'm not your enemy here, the sheriff said quietly. But I got a job to do, and if Marcus Vale shows up with legal papers and a judge's order, I can't just ignore it because you've gotten attached to a couple of strays. They're not strays. Then what are they? Elias didn't have an answer for that. Not one that would make sense to anyone who hadn't spent the last 5 days watching Clara haul water until her hands bled or seen Ben slowly start to trust again. Hackett waited a moment, then nodded. I'll take the bodies. File the report as self-defense. But you need to get ahead of this legal situation before it gets ahead of you. Find a lawyer. Get those kids' story on record. Because right now, all you got is a dead wife, a lonely ranch, and 2 children that legally belong to someone else. He paused. And that ain't gonna hold up in any court, I know. He left with the bodies loaded in a wagon, dust trailing behind him down the long road to town. Clara came out onto the porch. Her face was pale but set. He's right, you know. Uncle Marcus has the law on his side. For now. Elias, you can't just shoot your way through a custody case. Wasn't planning to. He looked at her. But I'm not giving you up either, so we figure something else out. Like what? I don't know yet. He started walking toward the damaged barn. But first we fix what's broken. Then we worry about the rest. Clara followed him. You need help. You should rest. Last night I shot a man. Her voice was flat. I'm not going to feel better by sitting around thinking about it. So put me to work. Elias looked at her for a long moment, saw the determination in her eyes, the set of her jaw. This girl was tougher than rawhide. All right, he said. Let's get to it. They worked through the morning, clearing debris from the barn, salvaging what could be saved. Ben appeared after an hour, still silent but carrying tools without being asked. The boy had dark circles under his eyes and jumped at every unexpected sound, but he worked steadily alongside them. Around noon, a wagon appeared on the horizon. Elias's hand went to his gun. Clara grabbed Ben and started backing toward the house. Wait, Elias said, squinting at the approaching vehicle. I know that wagon. It was Mrs. Delaney from the general store, her gray hair pinned up tight, her face creased with worry. She pulled up in front of the house and climbed down before Elias could even greet her. Elias Crowley, what in heaven's name have you gotten yourself into? Morning, Margaret. Don't you morning Margaret me. The whole town's buzzing about dead men and burning barns and… She stopped, seeing Clara and Ben. Her expression softened. Oh my. Mrs. Delaney? Clara's voice was tentative. Do you remember me? I'm Sarah Vale's daughter. Mama used to… Clara. Mrs. Delaney's hand flew to her mouth. Sweet, merciful. I heard your mama had passed. I'm so sorry, child. Sarah was a dear friend. She looked between Clara and Ben, then at Elias. And you took them in? Yes, ma'am. After their uncle, Marcus Vale, that snake, left them to starve. It wasn't a question. Mrs. Delaney had clearly heard the whole story from somewhere. I knew something was wrong when he showed up in town asking questions. Had that look about him, greedy and mean. You know Marcus? Clara asked. Met him once, years ago. Your mama didn't trust him worth a damn, pardon my language. And Sarah Vale was a good judge of character. Mrs. Delaney turned back to Elias. You know he's in town right now, staying at the hotel with some fancy businessman from Omaha. They've been talking to everyone, spreading stories about you being unstable and dangerous. What kind of stories? Elias asked quietly. That you kidnapped 2 children, that you're holding them against their will, that you killed their mother's friend who came to rescue them. She shook her head. It's all lies, of course. Anyone with eyes can see these children aren't prisoners. But people talk, Elias, and talk becomes truth if it gets repeated enough. Claire's face had gone pale. He's really here? In Clearwater? Arrived yesterday with a man named Victor Hale. Rich fellow, well-dressed, smooth talker. The kind of man who smiles while he robs you blind. Mrs. Delaney reached into her wagon and pulled out a basket. I brought supplies, figured you might need them, and I brought something else too. She handed Elias a folded newspaper. He opened it and felt his stomach drop. The headline read, Local rancher questioned in child abduction case. They printed this? His voice was dangerously quiet. Editors knew. Young fellow from back east who doesn't know better than to print whatever paying customers tell him to print. Mrs. Delaney's mouth was a thin line. Victor Hale paid for that article. Paid well, from what I hear. Elias read the article. It painted him as a violent drunk who'd taken advantage of 2 orphaned children, possibly for their inheritance money. It claimed Marcus Vale was a concerned uncle trying desperately to rescue his sister's children from a dangerous situation. Every word was poison. This is bad, Clara whispered, reading over his shoulder. People will believe this. Some already do, Mrs. Delaney admitted. But not everyone. There are folks in town who remember you, Elias. Remember what you were like before you lost your family. And there are folks who knew Sarah Vale and know Marcus is a lying weasel. She straightened her spine. You've got friends, whether you realize it or not. You're just going to need to remind people whose side they should be on. How? Elias asked. By telling the truth. Your truth. Clara's truth. She looked at the children. By making sure everyone knows what really happened, and by getting yourself a lawyer before Marcus Vale drags you into court. Can't afford a lawyer? Then we'll find one who'll work for something other than cash. Lord knows you've got land, cattle, labor to trade. Mrs. Delaney picked up her basket. In the meantime, I'm spreading the real story. Starting with the fact that Clara Vale wrote to me 2 months ago begging for help because her uncle had abandoned her and I was too slow to respond. That's on me, and I aim to make it right. Clara stared at her. You got my letter? 3 weeks ago. I was gathering money to send you stagecoach fare when I heard you'd already run. Mrs. Delaney's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm sorry, child. I should have moved faster. You couldn't have known, Clara said quietly. Maybe not. But I know now. And I know Elias Crowley might be a lot of things. But he's not a kidnapper or a drunk or a danger to children. She looked at Elias. Your wife would be proud of you. For doing the right thing even when it costs you. Elias couldn't speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. Mrs. Delaney climbed back into her wagon. I'll be back in a few days. In the meantime, you watch yourselves. Marcus Vale is a coward, but Victor Hale is something worse. He's smart, and smart enemies are the most dangerous kind. She drove away, leaving them standing in the dusty yard with a basket of supplies and a newspaper full of lies. Ben tugged on Clara's sleeve and pointed at the paper, his face worried. It's okay, Ben, Clara said, though her voice shook. It's just words. They can't hurt us. But Elias knew better. Words could destroy a man just as thoroughly as bullets, sometimes more thoroughly because you couldn't fight them with a gun. That evening, Elias rode into Clearwater alone. He'd left Clara and Ben at the ranch with strict instructions to bolt the doors and not open them for anyone. Clara had protested, wanting to come with him, but he'd been firm. If this went bad, he didn't want the children anywhere near it. The town looked the same as it always did, dusty Main Street, handful of buildings, people going about their business. But Elias could feel the difference in how they looked at him. Suspicious glances, whispered conversations that stopped when he passed. He tied his horse outside the hotel and walked inside. The lobby was small and shabby genteel, with worn carpet and a bored clerk behind the desk. Elias didn't bother with pleasantries. Marcus Vale. Which room? The clerk's eyes widened. I can't give out that information. Which room? Sir, I really can't. Room 7. The voice came from the stairs. Elias turned to see a man descending, tall, well-dressed, with cold eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. I'm Victor Hale, and you must be Elias Crowley. Where's Vale? Resting. The journey was difficult for him. So much worry about his poor niece and nephew. Hale reached the bottom of the stairs and studied Elias like he was a piece of livestock being evaluated for purchase. You're younger than I expected, and in better shape, despite the recent injury. The newspaper made you sound like a broken-down drunk. The newspaper's full of lies you paid for. Is it? Or is it simply telling the story from a different perspective? Hale's smile widened. You see, Mr. Crowley, there are always two sides to every tale. In your version, you're a hero rescuing 2 abandoned children. In Marcus Vale's version, you're a violent opportunist who saw a chance to get his hands on a valuable inheritance. Those kids don't have any inheritance. Now that's interesting. Because according to the documents we've uncovered, Clara and Benjamin Vale are beneficiaries of a substantial trust fund established by their maternal grandmother, approximately $15,000, to be released when they reach 18. Hale let that sink in. Quite a fortune for a struggling rancher, wouldn't you say? Elias felt cold. I didn't know about any trust fund. Of course you didn't. Just like you didn't know that Marcus Vale is their legal guardian with full custody rights. Just like you didn't know that taking children across state lines without parental consent is a federal crime. Hale pulled out a cigar and lit it. You see how this looks, don't you? From a legal standpoint? I see a man trying to steal from his own kin. Prove it. Hale blew smoke toward the ceiling. Prove that Marcus Vale intended any harm to those children. Prove that he wasn't simply delayed in collecting them due to legitimate business concerns. Prove that you didn't take them for your own gain. He smiled. You can't, because there's no evidence. Just your word against his. The kids will testify, but the kids are children, scared, confused, probably coached by you to say whatever keeps them on your ranch. Hale's voice was patient, like he was explaining something to a simpleton. No judge will give much weight to a 13-year-old's accusations, especially when she's clearly developed an attachment to her captor. It's quite common, actually. Stockholm Syndrome, they call it. Elias's hand moved toward his gun. Hale noticed but didn't flinch. Go ahead, Hale said softly. Shoot me. Right here in the hotel lobby. That'll certainly help your case. Elias forced his hand back to his side. Smart man. Hale took another puff of his cigar. Now, let me make you an offer, a generous one considering the circumstances. Marcus Vale is willing to drop all charges and all custody claims. You keep the children. Everyone's happy. In exchange for what? Your ranch. Elias stared at him. What? Your 160 acres. Sign them over to the Midwest Development Corporation. That's my company. And this all goes away. The newspaper retracts the story. Marcus Vale disappears. The children stay with you, legally adopted if you want, clean and simple. My ranch isn't for sale. Everything's for sale, Mr. Crowley. It's just a matter of price. Hale's eyes were like chips of ice. And before you refuse, consider this. The railroad is planning an expansion through this area. Your property sits right in the path. In 2 years, maybe 3, this land will be worth 10 times what it is now. I'm offering you a chance to walk away with the children you claim to care about so much. Or you can fight me in court, lose custody. Lose the ranch anyway when you can't pay legal fees and end up with nothing. Why do you want my land so bad? Because I know its value, and I know you don't. Hale stubbed out his cigar. You have 24 hours to decide. After that, Marcus Vale files formal custody papers with the territorial court. And I promise you, Mr. Crowley, you will lose. I have lawyers. I have money. I have witnesses who'll swear you're an unfit guardian. What do you have? The truth. Hale laughed, a genuinely amused sound. The truth? The truth is whatever the judge believes. And judges believe people like me, not people like you. He headed for the stairs, then paused. 24 hours. Think about what's best for those children. Because right now, you're the only thing standing between them and a safe, comfortable future with their loving uncle. Elias left the hotel before he did something stupid. He rode back to the ranch in darkness, his mind churning. $15,000. Railroad expansion. Victor Hale didn't just want the ranch, he needed it, which meant Elias had more leverage than Hale wanted him to know. But leverage didn't matter if he couldn't use it. And Hale was right about one thing. Elias didn't have money for lawyers or connections in court. He had a wounded body, a damaged ranch, and 2 kids who trusted him to keep them safe. Clara was waiting on the porch when he rode up. Well, it's bad. He dismounted and told her everything. The trust fund, Hale's offer, the 24-hour deadline. Clara listened in silence. When he finished, she said quietly, $15,000. Mama never told me. She was probably protecting it for to you, making sure Vale couldn't touch it. And now he's using it to take everything from us. Claire's voice was bitter. We should run, tonight. Take Ben and just disappear. Where? Hale's got money and men. He'll find you. Then what do we do? Elias looked at her, this fierce, stubborn girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast. We fight. You heard what he said. We'll lose in court. Maybe. But maybe we don't fight in court. An idea was forming, dangerous and half-baked. Maybe we fight in public. Make this about more than just custody. Make it about what kind of men get to take children from their homes. Clara frowned. I don't understand. Hale's using the newspaper to destroy my reputation. What if we used it to destroy his? How? By telling the real story, your story, what Vale did to you after your mother died, how he left you to starve, how he sent men to kill you. Elias leaned against the porch railing. People in this territory might not care about legal papers, but they care about kids, especially kids being hunted by their own family for money. The newspaper won't print that. Hale paid them. Then we find another way. Town meetings, church gatherings. We make sure everyone knows the truth before the court date. He looked at her. Can you do it? Can you stand up in front of strangers and tell them what happened? Clara was quiet for a long moment. If it keeps Ben safe, I can do anything. That's what I thought. They stayed up late planning. Not a legal strategy. Neither of them knew enough about law for that. But a campaign of truth-telling. Mrs. Delaney would help spread the word. Clara would speak at the next town meeting. They'd find witnesses who could testify to Vale's character or lack thereof. It wasn't much, but it was something. Ben appeared in the doorway around midnight, his tin horse clutched to his chest. He looked at Elias with those solemn eyes, then walked over and climbed into his lap. Elias went very still. The boy had never done that before. Ben didn't say anything. He still wasn't talking, but he settled against Elias's chest like he belonged there, like he was safe. Clara watched them with tears in her eyes. We're going to be okay, Elias said quietly, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. Whatever happens, we're going to be okay. Ben's hand found Elias's and held on tight. The next morning, Marcus Vale came to the ranch. Elias saw the fancy buggy approaching and sent Clara and Ben inside with orders to stay hidden. Then he walked out to meet his enemy. Vale was a soft-looking man in his 40s, well-fed and well-dressed, with weak eyes and a weak chin. He climbed down from the buggy like he was visiting a mildly distasteful but necessary appointment. Mr. Crowley, I'm Marcus Vale. I know who you are. Then you know I'm here for my niece and nephew. Vale's voice tried for authority but landed somewhere near petulance. This has gone on long enough. Those children belong with family. You left them alone for 4 months. I was arranging proper care for them. It takes time to... You were waiting for them to die. Elias kept his voice level. So you could claim their inheritance without the mess of actually raising them. Vale's face flushed. That's slander. I loved my sister. I would never... Then why'd you send men to kill them in the prairie? Why'd you burn my barn? I did no such thing. Those men were acting independently, probably just drifters who... Don't. Elias stepped closer. Don't stand on my property and lie to my face. You sent those men, and when they failed, you brought Victor Hale to finish the job legally. Vale's composure cracked slightly. Hale is a businessman helping me navigate a difficult situation. Nothing more. Hale's a vulture trying to steal my land, and you're helping him because he's paying you. Elias saw it in Vale's face. The guilt, the greed. How much is he giving you? Half the trust fund, a cut of whatever he makes when he flips my ranch to the railroad? You have no proof of... I don't need proof. I just need people to look at you and see what you really are. Elias smiled without humor. And that ain't hard. You got coward written all over you. Vale's hand moved toward his coat pocket. Elias's hand dropped to his gun. I wouldn't, Elias said softly. Vale froze. You're threatening me. I'm warning you. There's a difference. Elias took another step forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back in that buggy. You're going to ride back to town, and you're going to tell Victor Hale that those kids aren't for sale, and neither is my ranch. Or what? Or I'll make sure every person in 3 counties knows exactly what kind of man you are, starting with how you left your own sister's children to starve. Elias's voice went cold. You think Hale's money will protect you when people start spitting in your face on the street? You can't. Watch me. Vale's face cycled through anger, fear, and calculation. Finally, he said, Hale warned me you'd be difficult. He said to give you this. He pulled a paper from his pocket. Custody hearing, territorial court, 3 days from now. If you don't show up with the children, the judge issues a warrant for your arrest. He dropped the paper on the ground and climbed back into his buggy. You're making a mistake, Crowley. Hale always wins. Always. There's a first time for everything. Vale drove away, leaving dust and the court summons behind. Elias picked up the paper and read it. Official legal language, stamped and signed. In 3 days, he'd have to stand in front of a judge and defend his right to keep children that legally belong to someone else. He looked at the house where Clara and Ben were hiding. 3 days to build a case, 3 days to turn public opinion, 3 days to figure out how to fight a man with money and lawyers and the law on his side. It wasn't enough time, but it was all he had. Clara came out onto the porch. What did he want? Elias showed her the summons. Her face went pale. 3 days, she whispered. That's not... I know. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. But we've got something Vale and Hale don't. What's that? The truth, and people who'll listen to it. He looked at her. You ready to fight? Clara straightened her spine. I've been fighting my whole life. This is just one more round. That's my girl. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Clara's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't correct him, just nodded and went back inside to tell Ben. Elias stood in his yard and looked at the half-burned barn, the dusty land, the small house that had been empty for so long. 3 days to save his family, because that's what they were now, whether the law recognized it or not. His family. And he'd burn the whole territory down before he let anyone take them away. The courtroom in Clearwater wasn't built for the crowd that showed up that Tuesday morning. People packed the benches, lined the walls, spilled out onto the courthouse steps. Elias had never seen half the town turn out for anything, but here they were. Ranchers and storekeepers, farmers and their wives, even old Doc Morrison, who rarely left his office. Some had come to watch justice served. Others had come to watch a man lose everything. Elias sat at the defendant's table with Clara beside him, and Ben pressed against her other side. The boy hadn't let go of his sister's hand since they had arrived an hour ago. His tin horse sat on the table in front of him, the only thing keeping him from bolting. Across the aisle, Marcus Vale sat with Victor Hale and a lawyer from Omaha, a sharp-eyed man named Garrison who looked like he ate nails for breakfast. They were relaxed, confident, men who knew the outcome before the game even started. Judge Thornton entered and everyone stood. He was an older man with white hair and a face carved from granite, known for being fair but hard. He'd presided over this territory for 20 years and didn't suffer fools. "Be seated," his voice carried through the packed room. "We're here for the matter of custody regarding Clara and Benjamin Vale, currently residing with Elias Crowley. Mr. Garrison, you're representing the petitioner Marcus Vale." "I am, Your Honor." Garrison stood smoothly. "Mr. Vale is the legal guardian of these children as designated by their late mother. We're here to recover them from Mr. Crowley, who has unlawfully detained them for over 2 weeks." Detained? Elias started to stand but felt Clara's hand on his arm. "You'll get your turn, Mr. Crowley," Judge Thornton said. "Mr. Garrison, present your case." What followed was a masterclass in legal character assassination. Garrison painted Elias as a violent drunk who'd kidnapped 2 vulnerable children, possibly for their inheritance. He presented the newspaper article as evidence. He called Vale to the stand where the man performed beautifully, the concerned uncle who'd been searching desperately for his missing niece and nephew, only to find them held captive by a dangerous stranger. "Mr. Vale," Garrison said gently, "can you describe your relationship with your late sister?" "We were very close." Vale dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief. "When Sarah got sick, I promised her I'd take care of Clara and Benjamin. It was her dying wish." Elias felt Clara go rigid beside him. He put a hand on her shoulder, steady and calm. "And what happened after your sister passed?" Garrison asked. "I had to settle her affairs, find proper accommodation for the children. It took time. I wanted everything to be perfect for them." Vale's voice cracked convincingly. "When I returned to collect them, they were gone. I was frantic. I hired men to search, and when we finally got word they might be in this area, I came immediately. And found them with Mr. Crowley." "Yes, who refused to return them to me." "Did Mr. Crowley make any demands? Ask for money?" "He said—" Vale hesitated, as if the memory pained him. "He said if I wanted the children back, I'd have to go through him, that they were his now." It was a lie, a complete fabrication, but it landed perfectly in the silent courtroom. Garrison nodded sympathetically. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Thornton looked at Elias. "Mr. Crowley, do you have representation?" "No, Your Honor, can't afford it." "Then you'll represent yourself. Do you wish to cross-examine the witness?" Elias stood. He wasn't a lawyer, didn't know courtroom procedure, but he knew how to ask questions. "Mr. Vale, you said you came back to collect the children. When exactly was that?" Vale looked to Garrison, who nodded. 4 months after my sister's death, I needed time to... 4 months. Elias let that hang. "And in those 4 months, did you send money for their care? Food? Anything?" The estate was complicated. "It's a yes or no question. Did you send money? Not directly, but did you visit them? Write letters? Any contact at all?" Vale's face reddened. "I was grieving, making arrangements, so that's a no." Elias looked at the judge. 4 months, no money, no contact, nothing. 2 kids left alone in a house with no food and no help. Does that sound like a loving uncle to you?" "Objection!" Garrison was on his feet. "Mr. Crowley is testifying, not questioning." "Sustained," Judge Thornton said. "Keep it to questions, Mr. Crowley." Elias nodded. "Mr. Vale, you mentioned hiring men to search for the children. What were their names?" I don't recall exactly. Try. Because I remember the names of the men who came to my ranch, Pritchard and his crew, then 3 more who tried to burn me out and kill these kids. You remember hiring them?" "Your Honor, this is outrageous," Garrison started. "I hired trackers," Vale said quickly. "If they acted inappropriately, I had no knowledge." "No knowledge that men you hired tried to murder children?" Elias's voice rose. "Or no knowledge because you told them to make it look like an accident?" The courtroom erupted. Judge Thornton's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order, Mr. Crowley. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." Elias sat down. He'd made his point, even if the judge didn't like how. Garrison called his next witness, a doctor from Omaha who testified he'd examined Vale and found him to be of sound mind and body, perfectly capable of raising children. Then a banker who confirmed Vale's financial stability. Then a neighbor who swore Vale was a pillar of the community. Each witness was a brick in the wall they were building around Elias. Finally, Garrison called Victor Hale to the stand. Hale cut an impressive figure, well-dressed, articulate, the very picture of respectable businessmen. He described how he'd met Vale, how concerned he'd been about the missing children, how he'd offered to help out of pure civic duty. "And what's your assessment of Mr. Crowley?" Garrison asked. Troubled. Hale's voice was measured, regretful. "I spoke with him personally, tried to reason with him, but he was paranoid, aggressive, made wild accusations about conspiracies and railroad deals. Honestly, I feared for the children's safety." "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly, but there was an implied violence in everything he said." Hale looked at the jury like a disappointed father. "I believe Mr. Crowley may have convinced himself he's protecting these children, but delusion doesn't make it right." Elias wanted to put his fist through Hale's teeth. Instead, he sat still and waited. When his turn came, he stood and said simply, "Mr. Hale, how much is my ranch worth?" Hale blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Simple question. You're a businessman. You know land values. How much is my 160 acres worth on the open market?" "I have no idea." "Really? Because you offered to buy it from me 3 days ago. For how much?" Hale's jaw tightened. "I don't recall making any such offer. Your Honor, I'd like to call a witness who can verify that conversation. Mrs. Margaret Delaney." Garrison objected immediately. "Mrs. Delaney wasn't present at any alleged conversation, but she can verify that Mr. Hale has been asking around town about land purchases in the area, specifically properties along the proposed railroad route." Elias looked at the judge. "Seems relevant to his claim of pure civic duty." Judge Thornton studied both men. "I'll allow it. Mrs. Delaney, come forward." Margaret Delaney took the stand with the bearing of a general entering battle. She confirmed that Hale had been making inquiries about land purchases, that he'd asked specifically about Elias's property, that the whole town knew the railroad expansion was coming and land values would skyrocket. "So this isn't about children at all," Elias said. "It's about money. Hale wants my ranch, Vale wants the trust fund, and these two kids are just obstacles to remove." "That's a lie!" Vale shouted from his seat. Judge Thornton's gavel slammed down. "Mr. Vale, control yourself or leave my courtroom." The morning dragged on. More witnesses, more testimony, more legal maneuvering. Through it all, Clara sat silent and pale, her hand gripping Ben so tight her knuckles were white. Finally, Judge Thornton called a recess for lunch. Outside the courthouse, Mrs. Delaney pulled Elias aside. "You're doing better than I expected, but it's not enough. That judge is old-fashioned. He's going to side with Blood family unless you give him a compelling reason not to." "I'm trying. Try harder. Because right now, Garrison's winning." She looked at Clara, who stood with Ben by the courthouse steps, surrounded by curious onlookers. "That girl needs to speak. Her testimony is the only thing that might turn this around. She's 13. She's the only one who knows what really happened. Let her tell it." Mrs. Delaney's voice was firm. "Stop trying to protect her and let her protect herself." Elias looked at Clara. The girl was already watching him, reading his face. She walked over. "What is it?" "You need to testify," Elias said quietly. "Tell the judge everything. About your mama, about Vale leaving you, about running, all of it." Clara's face went pale. "In front of everyone?" "In front of everyone." "I don't know if I can." "You can." Elias crouched down so they were eye level. "You're the bravest person I know, Clara. You kept your brother alive for 4 months. You walked across the prairie being hunted. You shot a man to protect your family. You can do this." Tears welled in her eyes. "What if they don't believe me?" "Then at least they'll have heard the truth." He put his hands on her shoulders. "And sometimes that's all we can do. Tell the truth and hope it's enough." Clara looked at Ben, who watched them both with those solemn dark eyes. Then she straightened her spine and wiped her eyes. "Okay," she said, "I'll do it." When court resumed, Elias called Clara to the stand. She walked up with her head high, climbed into the witness chair, and looked out at the packed courtroom. For a moment, Elias saw her falter, saw the 13-year-old girl underneath the tough exterior. Then she found his eyes and steadied. "State your name for the record," Judge Thornton said gently. "Clara May Vale." Her voice was small but clear. "And how old are you, Miss Vale?" 13, sir." "Do you understand you're under oath, that you need to tell the truth?" "Yes, sir." Judge Thornton nodded. "Mr. Crowley, proceed." Elias stood. "Clara, can you tell the court what happened after your mother died?" Clara took a breath. "Mama got sick in February. Consumption. She knew she was dying, so she made arrangements. Made Uncle Marcus promise to take care of Ben and me. Gave him legal papers, making him our guardian." Her voice was steady now, gaining strength. "The day after the funeral, Uncle Marcus came to our house. Looked around, asked questions about Mama's family, then he left. Said he'd send for us when he was situated." "Did he send for you?" "No, sir. We waited. Kept waiting. The food ran out. The landlord wanted rent we couldn't pay. I tried to find work, but nobody wants to hire a 13-year-old girl for anything that pays real money." She looked at Vale, her eyes hard. "We were starving. I was feeding Ben what little I could find and going without myself. And Uncle Marcus never came. Never wrote. Never sent a single dollar." "How long did you wait?" 4 months. Then one day Uncle Marcus showed up with those men. I heard them talking outside. Uncle Marcus owed money to Mr. Hale's company. Bad debts. And there was a trust fund for Mama's family. Money for Ben and me when we turn 18. But if we died before that, it would go to your uncle," Elias finished. "Objection." Garrison was on his feet. "The witness is speculating about conversations she allegedly overheard." "I didn't allegedly overhear anything," Clara cut in, her voice sharp. "I stood right there and listened to Uncle Marcus tell those men that his problem would be solved once we were gone. He didn't want us. He wanted our money, and he figured 2 kids alone on the prairie wouldn't last long." The courtroom was dead silent. Judge Thornton leaned forward. "Miss Vale, are you saying your uncle planned to harm you?" "I'm saying he wanted us dead, Your Honor, and he didn't care how it happened as long as it looked natural." Clara's voice broke slightly. "So I took Ben and I ran. I had $17 I'd saved from washing clothes. We walked for 3 days, sleeping in the grass, eating whatever we could find, and those men hunted us the whole way." "What men?" "The ones Uncle Marcus hired. They caught up to us on the 4th day. Had rifles. Said they were taking us back to Omaha, but I heard one of them say—" She swallowed hard. "He said it was a shame they had to make it look like an accident, that it'd be easier to just shoot us and be done." Vale was on his feet. "This is insane. I never—" "Sit down, Mr. Vale." Judge Thornton's gavel cracked. "Miss Vale, continue." Clara looked at Elias. "That's when Mr. Crowley found us. He stopped those men, got shot himself doing it. Then he brought us to his ranch and—" Her voice went soft. "And for the first time in 4 months, Ben and I felt safe." "Did Mr. Crowley ask you for anything? Money, information about the trust fund, anything?" "No, sir. He didn't even know about the trust until Mr. Hale told him. Mr. Crowley he just helped us because it was the right thing to do." Elias sat down, let Clara's words settle over the courtroom like snow. Garrison stood for cross-examination. His smile was sharp. "Miss Vale, you've painted quite a dramatic picture. But isn't it true that you're a frightened child who's been influenced by Mr. Crowley? That perhaps you've misinterpreted your uncle's intentions?" "No." "No? You don't think it's possible that a traumatized 13-year-old might imagine threats where none exist? I didn't imagine those men pointing rifles at us. You were running away. They were attempting to bring you home. Perhaps you misunderstood. I understood just fine when they set fire to Mr. Crowley's barn and tried to kill us in the middle of the night." Clara's voice was ice. "I understood when I had to shoot one of them to keep him from murdering Mr. Crowley. I understood when my little brother screamed because a man put a gun to his head." Garrison's confidence flickered. "You shot a man?" "Yes, sir. To protect my family. Because that's what Mr. Crowley is now. He's more family than Uncle Marcus ever was." "Family? You've known him 2 weeks. I've known him long enough to see he's a good man who keeps his promises, which is more than I can say about my uncle." Garrison tried several more times to shake her testimony, but Clara didn't budge. She answered every question with calm certainty, never wavering, never backing down. When he finally gave up, Judge Thornton looked at Clara with something like respect. "You can step down, Miss Vale." Clara walked back to her seat. Her hands were shaking, but her head was high. Elias wanted to tell her how proud he was, but there were still more witnesses to call. Mrs. Delaney testified about Sarah Vale's character, about how she'd never trusted her brother, about the letter Clara had sent begging for help. Sheriff Hackett reluctantly confirmed the attacks on Elias's ranch. Doc Morrison testified about treating Elias's gunshot wound and Clara's raw, bleeding hands from hauling water for days. Each piece added to the picture Clara had painted, but Garrison had one more card to play. Your Honor, I'd like to call Benjamin Vale to the stand. The courtroom erupted. Elias was on his feet immediately. He's 5 years old and he doesn't speak. Exactly my point, Garrison said smoothly. The child has been rendered mute by trauma. Trauma that began after he came under Mr. Crowley's care. I believe the court should see the condition this child is in. He was mute before he met Mr. Crowley. Clara's voice was desperate. Since Mama died. So you say, but we have no independent verification of that. Garrison looked at the judge. Let the court see what Mr. Crowley's protection has done to this boy. Judge Thornton hesitated. The child is very young. The child is the subject of this custody hearing. The court needs to assess his well-being. It was a cruel move and everyone knew it, but it was legal. Very well, Judge Thornton said reluctantly. Master Benjamin Vale, please approach. Ben's face went white. He pressed against Clara, shaking his head. It's okay, Ben, Clara whispered. Just go up there. You don't have to say anything. Just sit there. But Ben was frozen, trembling, the same terrified expression he'd worn when Elias first found him in the grass. Elias knelt in front of the boy. Ben, look at me. Look at me, son. Ben's eyes found his. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. But if you want to show that judge who you really are, not scared, not broken, just you, then you walk up there and you sit down. And no matter what anyone says, you remember that Clara and I are right here. We're not going anywhere. Ben's breathing slowed. He looked at his sister, then back at Elias. Then, incredibly, he nodded. He stood up, clutching his tin horse, and walked to the witness stand. His legs barely reached the floor when he sat down. The courtroom was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Garrison approached like a predator circling prey. Benjamin, can you speak? Ben stared at him. Can you tell the court your name? Silence. Can you tell us how Mr. Crowley treats you? Nothing. Garrison turned to the judge. Your Honor, as you can see, this child has been so traumatized by his experiences that he's lost the ability to communicate. This is what Mr. Crowley's care looks like. That's not true, Clara was standing. Ben stopped talking when Mama died. Hearsay, Garrison said dismissively. Elias felt rage building in his chest. This was wrong. Using a traumatized child as a prop, twisting his silence into evidence. It was the cruelest thing he'd seen in a courtroom full of cruelty. Then Ben moved. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a scrap of paper, the one he'd been drawing on at breakfast days ago. Carefully, deliberately, he unfolded it. It was a picture. A house with a barn. 3 figures standing in front. A man, a girl, and a small boy. Above them, in careful childish letters, one word, family. Ben held it up so the judge could see. Then he turned to look at Elias. And for the first time in 4 months, Benjamin Vale spoke. He didn't ride past. His voice was small and rusty from disuse, but in the silent courtroom, it rang like a bell. He didn't ride past us, Ben said again, louder now. Uncle Marcus did, but he didn't. The courtroom exploded. Garrison tried to object, but couldn't be heard over the noise. Vale was shouting denials. Judge Thornton's gavel slammed repeatedly. Ben climbed down from the stand and walked straight to Elias, who scooped him up without thinking. The boy wrapped his arms around Elias's neck and buried his face against his shoulder. You're okay, Elias murmured. You're okay, son. Pa, Ben whispered against his neck. Don't let them take us, Pa. Elias's throat closed completely. Judge Thornton finally restored order. We'll take a 30-minute recess while I consider the testimony. Those 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. Elias sat outside with Clara and Ben, the boy still refusing to let go. Clara had tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. He talked, she kept saying. He finally talked. Heard that, Elias said roughly. And he called you Pa. Heard that too. Mrs. Delaney appeared with water. Whatever happens in there, you've already won the important fight. Those children know who their family is. But the legal fight wasn't over. When they filed back inside, Judge Thornton looked grim. He surveyed the courtroom, then began to speak. This has been one of the most difficult cases I've presided over. The law is clear. Marcus Vale is the legal guardian designated by the children's mother. That designation carries significant weight. Elias felt his stomach drop. However, Thornton continued, the law also requires me to act in the best interests of the children. And based on the testimony I've heard today, particularly from Miss Clara Vale and young Benjamin, I have serious concerns about returning them to Mr. Vale's custody. Vale started to object, but Garrison shut him up with a hand on his arm. Therefore, I'm ordering a continuance. The children will remain in Mr. Crowley's temporary care while I request an independent investigation into the allegations made here today. Sheriff Hackett, I'm appointing you to lead that investigation. You'll report back in 30 days. Your Honor, this is highly irregular, Garrison began. So is an uncle who abandons his niece and nephew for 4 months, then suddenly appears demanding custody when money's involved, Thornton snapped. 30 days. We reconvene October 15th. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. It wasn't a win, but it wasn't a loss either. Elias carried Ben out of the courthouse with Clara pressed against his side. Behind them he could hear Vale arguing with Garrison, Hale's smooth voice trying to calm the situation. Outside a crowd had gathered. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked angry. The town was divided, just like Elias had known it would be. Then someone started clapping. It was old Silas Hendricks, a rancher from the North County who'd lost his own son years back. Others joined in. Not everyone, maybe not even half, but enough. Mrs. Delaney appeared beside them. You bought yourself 30 days. Use them well. How? Clara asked. They'll just come back with better lawyers. Then we find evidence. Real evidence. Letters, witnesses, financial records. Something that proves Vale's intent. She looked at Elias. And you better pray Sheriff Hackett's investigation turns up what we need. They rode back to the ranch in silence. Ben fell asleep against Elias's chest, exhausted from speaking for the first time in months. Clara stared at the prairie, lost in thought. As they approached the house, Elias saw smoke, not from his chimney, from the north pasture. He spurred the horse forward, heart pounding. The barn was on fire. Again. Bigger this time, flames already consuming the main structure. And beyond it, he could see the dry prairie grass catching, fire spreading fast in the wind. Clara saw it too. No, 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 no! They raced toward the ranch. Elias barely stopped the horse before jumping down and running toward the barn. The heat hit him like a wall. Stay with Ben, he shouted at Clara, then plunged toward the inferno. His cattle were screaming in the far pasture. The chickens were already gone. Everything he'd built, everything he'd saved. Someone grabbed his arm and spun him around. Sheriff Hackett. Don't be stupid, Crowley. The barn's gone. We need to stop the grass fire before it takes the whole territory. We? Elias looked past him and saw wagons arriving. Neighbors he barely knew, men from town, even some who'd looked at him with suspicion in the courtroom. They were carrying shovels, blankets, water barrels. Fire doesn't care about custody disputes, Hackett said. Now grab a shovel and help dig a fire break before everyone loses their ranches. For the next 4 hours, Elias fought fire alongside men who might have testified against him in court. They dug trenches, beat out flames, soaked the ground ahead of the blaze. Clara worked beside him, refusing to stay safe, her face streaked with soot. And Ben, small, silent Ben, who'd found his voice that morning, ran water to the men with a determination that would have made a grown man proud. By the time they got the fire under control, the barn was ash. Half the pasture was burned. Elias's hands were blistered and his lungs felt like they'd been scraped raw, but the house still stood. Silas Hendricks appeared beside him as the sun set. That was arson. You know that, right? Yeah. You know who did it? Got a pretty good idea. Can you prove it? Not yet. Silas nodded slowly. I'll tell you something, Crowley. I didn't know what to think about you and those kids. Legal papers say one thing, but... He looked at where Ben was curled up asleep against Clara's side, both of them covered in soot. But that boy called you Pa in that courtroom, and kids know. They always know who's safe and who ain't. He walked back to his wagon, leaving Elias standing in the ruins. Clara came over. Her eyes were red-rimmed from smoke and crying. They're not going to stop, are they? Vale and Hale. They'll just keep coming until we have nothing left. Maybe. So what do we do? Elias looked at his burned barn, his scorched land, his children covered in ash, looked at the neighbors loading their wagons to head home, looked at the house that had been empty for 11 years and was now everything. We rebuild, he said quietly, and we fight, because that's what families do. Ben stirred in his sleep and murmured something that sounded like "Pa." Clara leaned her head against Elias's shoulder. We're really your family now? Even if the law says different? Especially if the law says different. They stood together watching the last of the smoke drift across the darkening prairie. 3 people bound by something stronger than blood or legal papers. They were bound by choice. And that, Elias was beginning to understand, was the strongest bond there was. The arrest came 6 days after the fire. Elias was hauling salvaged timber when Sheriff Hackett rode up with 2 deputies and a telegram in his hand. His face was grim but satisfied, the look of a man who'd finally found what he'd been digging for. Crowley, you're going to want to see this. Elias set down the beam and wiped sweat from his forehead. Clara appeared from the house, Ben trailing behind her. The boy hadn't let either of them out of his sight since the courthouse. Hackett dismounted and handed over the telegram. Came in this morning from Omaha. Friend of mine works at the First National Bank there. Elias read it twice to make sure he understood. Then he looked up at the sheriff. This is real. Real as rain. Victor Hale's been running a land fraud scheme for 3 years. Buys up property along planned railroad routes using shell companies, then flips them for 10 times the price. But he's been getting greedy, forging deeds, bribing surveyors, even arson to force sales. Hackett's voice was tight. Your barn wasn't the first. He's burned out 6 other ranchers in the last year. Can you prove it? The bank's got records of payments to known arsonists. One of them was picked up in Kansas 2 weeks ago and started talking to save his own neck. Named Hale directly. Named the men he hired. Hackett paused. Including the 3 who died on your property. Clara made a small sound. Elias put his hand on her shoulder. What about Vale? He asked. That's the interesting part. My deputy did some digging in the county records. Turns out Marcus Vale's been in debt to Hale's company for almost a year. Owed over $8,000 from bad investments. Then suddenly, last month, that debt got forgiven. Completely wiped out. Hackett looked at Clara. Right around the time your mama died. He sold us, Clara whispered. Uncle Marcus sold Ben and me to Hale to clear his debts. That's what it looks like. Hale needed your uncle's cooperation to get at the trust fund. Vale needed his debts cleared. So they made a deal. Hackett's jaw was tight. And 2 kids nearly died because of it. Elias felt rage building in his chest, cold and controlled. Where are they now? That's why I'm here. Federal marshals are on their way from Omaha to make the arrests. Should be here by nightfall. He looked at Elias carefully. I need you to promise me you won't do anything stupid before they arrive. Define stupid, Elias. I'm not going to kill them, if that's what you're asking, but I want to be there when they get arrested. I want them to see my face. Hackett studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Fair enough, but you leave your gun at home. The hell I will. Not negotiable. You show up armed and this goes sideways, you'll be the one in handcuffs. Hackett's voice softened. Let the law handle it. For once. Elias wanted to argue, but Clara's hand found his. He's right. We've come this far doing it the right way. Don't mess it up now. The words stung because they were true. Elias had spent 11 years solving problems with his fists or his gun, but these kids needed something different from him. They needed him to be better. All right, he said finally, we do it legal. The marshals arrived just after sunset, 2 hard-faced men with federal badges and arrest warrants. Elias rode into town with them, unarmed as promised. Clara and Ben left safe at the ranch with Mrs. Delaney standing guard. The hotel lobby was quiet when they entered. The desk clerk took one look at the badges and pointed wordlessly toward the stairs. Room 7. Mr. Hale's still up there with Mr. Vale. They were talking about leaving town tomorrow. Not anymore, one of the marshals said. They climbed the stairs, boot steps heavy on the worn carpet. At room 7, the lead marshal didn't bother knocking. He kicked the door open. Victor Hale looked up from a desk covered in papers, his expression cycling from surprise to calculation to resignation in about 3 seconds. Marcus Vale sat in a chair by the window, already half drunk, and just stared. Victor Hale, you're under arrest for fraud, arson, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 6 other charges I'll read you on the way to Omaha. The marshal produced handcuffs. Marcus Vale, you're under arrest as an accessory. Both of you need to stand up nice and slow. Hale didn't move. His eyes found Elias standing in the doorway. You couldn't just take the money and walk away. Had to be a hero. I didn't do anything, Elias said quietly. You did it to yourself. That trust fund is real. Those children are owed that money. I was just using 2 kids as pawns in your land scheme, then trying to kill them when they became inconvenient. Elias stepped into the room. How's that working out for you? Hale's mask finally cracked. You're a nobody, a washed-up drunk living on a worthless piece of dirt. In 2 years, I would have owned half this territory. I would have been in prison, the marshal finished, which is where you're going now, on your feet. They cuffed Hale first. He went silently, that calculating look back in his eyes like he was already planning his defense. But when they reached for Vale, the man broke down completely. I didn't want this, he sobbed. I never wanted to hurt them. I needed the money. Hale said it would be simple, that we'd just scare them a little and they'd sign over the trust. But then they ran and everything got out of control. Shut up, Marcus, Hale snapped. No, I'm done protecting you. Vale looked at Elias with red, desperate eyes. I loved my sister, I swear I did. But when she died and I saw how much debt I was in, and Hale offered me a way out, I convinced myself the kids would be fine, that someone would take them in, that I wasn't really abandoning them. But you were, Elias said flatly. You left them to starve, and when they survived anyway, you tried to have them killed. I didn't. Hale hired those men, not me. You knew about it, didn't stop it. That makes you just as guilty. Elias stepped closer. Ben called you Uncle Marcus. He trusted you, and you were going to let him die for $8,000. Vale collapsed into sobs. The marshals hauled him to his feet and cuffed him anyway. As they led both men out, Hale paused beside Elias. This isn't over. I've got lawyers, money, connections. I'll be out in 6 months. Maybe, Elias said, but those kids will still have a home, and you'll still be the man who tried to murder children for profit. Good luck living with that. Hale's face went white. Then the marshal shoved him toward the stairs. Elias stood in the empty hotel room, looking at the papers scattered across Hale's desk. Maps of the territory with property lines marked, letters to railroad officials, bank statements showing the staggering amounts of money Hale had been moving around. All of it for greed. All of it nearly destroying 2 children who'd already lost everything. Sheriff Hackett appeared in the doorway. It's done. They're headed to Omaha tonight. Federal judge will handle it from here. What about the custody case? With Vale under arrest, Judge Thornton will dismiss it. Kids are yours now, legal and proper. Hackett leaned against the doorframe. You did good, Crowley. Could have handled this a dozen different ways, most of them bloody, but you chose the hard way, the right way. Clara chose it, Elias said. She's the one who wanted to fight this in court instead of just running. I was ready to shoot my way out. But you didn't, because of those kids, because they made you better. Hackett smiled slightly. That's what family does. Changes us whether we want it or not. Elias thought about that on the long ride home, about the man he'd been 2 weeks ago, alone, angry, waiting to die, and the man he was now, riding home to 2 children who needed him to be something more than a ghost. The ranch house had a light burning when he arrived. Clara was on the porch before he'd even dismounted. Well, they arrested them both. It's over. Clara's knees buckled. Elias caught her before she hit the ground, held her while she cried. Not sad tears, but the kind that came from finally being able to let go of fear she'd been carrying for months. Ben appeared in the doorway, Mrs. Delaney behind him. The boy ran to Elias and wrapped his arms around his legs. We're safe now? His voice was still quiet, still uncertain, but getting stronger every day. Yeah, son, we're safe. Forever? Elias picked him up. Forever. Mrs. Delaney wiped her eyes. I'll leave you folks to it. But Elias, you come by the store tomorrow. We need to talk about getting those guardianship papers properly filed. Make this official in the eyes of the law. I will. And Margaret, thank you for everything. She waved him off, but her smile was warm. Those children needed you, and I think maybe you needed them too. After she left, Elias sat on the porch with Clara and Ben, watching the stars come out. The burned barn was a dark shape against the sky, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. What happens now? Clara asked quietly. Now we rebuild. The barn, the pasture, everything. Elias looked at her. And we make this official. Guardianship papers, legal adoption if you want it. You'd be Clara Crowley. Ben would be Benjamin Crowley. Clara was quiet for a long moment. What about Mama? Would we be forgetting her if we took your name? No, never. Your mama loved you more than anything in this world. And I think... Elias had to stop and clear his throat. I think she'd be glad you found someone to take care of you, to keep you safe. She would have liked you, Clara said softly. Mama always said the measure of a man wasn't what he had, but what he'd give up for others. You gave up everything for us, your peace, your safety, almost your life. I didn't give up anything. I got everything back. Elias pulled them both closer. I got you two. Got a reason to fix this place up instead of just letting it rot. Got a reason to wake up in the morning that isn't just surviving another day. Ben was falling asleep against his chest. Clara leaned her head on Elias's shoulder. I want to be Clara Crowley, she said. And I want Ben to be Benjamin Crowley. If that's okay? More than okay. They sat like that until Ben was fully asleep and Clara was starting to nod off too. Elias carried the boy inside and put him to bed, Clara following on unsteady legs. Both kids were asleep within minutes, exhausted from weeks of fear and stress finally releasing. Elias stood in the doorway watching them sleep. His children. Not by blood, but by choice. By fire and fear and fighting to keep each other safe. He thought about Sarah and Michael, buried 11 years ago in graves he hadn't visited since. Thought about the guilt he'd carried, the belief that he didn't deserve a second chance at family. But looking at Clara and Ben sleeping in his house, he realized something. It wasn't about deserving. It was about being there. About not riding past when someone needed help. About choosing to fight even when it would be easier to walk away. Sarah would have understood. She'd always been the one who saw the best in people, who believed broken things could be mended. Maybe that's what these kids were doing for him. Mending something that had been broken so long he'd forgotten it could be fixed. The next morning, wagons started arriving. Elias heard them before he saw them. The creak of wheels, the jingle of harnesses, voices calling out greetings. He walked outside to find half the county in his front yard. Silas Hendricks climbed down from the first wagon. Heard you need a barn. I can't pay. Didn't ask you to. You helped fight that fire before it took all our ranches. Figure we owe you a hand. Silas gestured to the other wagons. Brought lumber, nails, tools. Got about 20 men here who know which end of a hammer to hold. We can have you a new barn up in 3 days if we work hard. Why? Elias's voice was rough. Most of you barely know me. Don't need to know you. We know those kids. Saw what they went through in that courtroom. Saw that little boy find his voice to defend you. Silas met his eyes. And we know what Hale tried to do. Burning a man out to steal his land? That don't stand. Not in this territory. More men were arriving, ranchers, farmers, even a few from town. They didn't ask permission, just started unloading lumber and organizing work crews. Someone had brought food. Mrs. Delaney arrived with her wagon full of supplies and started directing the women who'd come to help cook. Clara stood on the porch, staring in disbelief. Are they really building us a barn? Elias finished. Yeah, they really are. Ben tugged on Elias's hand. Can I help? You bet you can, son. They worked all day. Elias alongside men he'd ignored for 6 years. Clara running water and helping cook. Ben carrying tools and nails, taking his job seriously. By sunset, the frame was up. By the next day, walls were rising. On the third day, they put on the roof. It wasn't fancy, wasn't perfect. Some beams were crooked and the door hung slightly off kilter, but it was solid and it was theirs, built by a community that had decided these kids deserved a home. When the last nail was hammered in, Silas stepped back and nodded. That'll do. Stronger than the old one, actually. Should last you years. I don't know how to thank you, Elias said. Don't need thanks. Just take care of those kids, and maybe... Silas looked uncomfortable. Maybe don't be such a stranger. We got a community here if you want to be part of it. I will, I promise. After everyone left, Elias walked through the new barn with Clara and Ben. It smelled of fresh wood and possibility. His cattle could be housed properly now. The chickens had new coops. Everything they'd lost in the fire had been restored, and then some. People aren't all bad, Clara said quietly. Are they? No, some of them are pretty damn good when you give them the chance. Elias looked at her. Like you, like Ben, like everyone who showed up here to help strangers. Ben was running his hand along the new stall doors, examining everything with the focus of someone who cared about details. Can we paint it? He asked. Mama used to paint our barn red, said it looked cheerful. We can paint it any color you want, son. Red, Ben said firmly. Then, Pa, when we paint it, can I help? Wouldn't want to do it without you. That evening, Mrs. Delaney arrived with legal papers and a bottle of whiskey. She spread the guardianship documents on the kitchen table while Elias poured drinks for both of them. Judge Thornton signed these this morning. Official legal guardianship effective immediately. Vale's parental rights terminated due to the criminal charges. You're their legal guardian now. She sipped her whiskey. And there's more. I did some digging on that trust fund. It's real. $15,000 held in a Boston bank, established by the children's maternal grandmother. Can't be touched until they're 18, but the interest can be used for their care and education. How much interest? Elias asked. About $40 a month. Not a fortune, but enough to help with expenses. Enough to send them to proper schools when they're ready. She pulled out another paper. And this is the deed report on your property. With Hale's arrest, all his land schemes are being investigated. Turns out he'd been planning to claim your ranch through some legal loophole he was building. But that's dead now. Your land is yours, free and clear. Elias stared at the papers. In 1 week, he'd gone from nearly losing everything to having more security than he'd had in years. There's something else, Mrs. Delaney said. The railroad expansion? It's confirmed. They're buying right-of-way through this area. Your property isn't directly in the path, but it's close enough that land values are going up. If you wanted to sell in a few years, you could probably get, I'm not selling. I didn't think so. But you should know you've got options. She smiled. This ranch that was worth maybe $1,500 2 months ago? It's worth 5 times that now. And it'll keep growing. You're sitting on real wealth here, Elias, for the first time in your life. Wealth. The word felt strange. Elias had spent 11 years barely scraping by, and before that he'd been a ranch hand living paycheck to paycheck. He'd never had real money. What do I do with it? He asked. Whatever you want. But if you're smart, you think about the future. Those kids need education. Clara's smart as a whip. She could be a teacher if she wanted. Ben's got a gift with animals and drawing. They deserve chances you never had. Mrs. Delaney finished her whiskey. This is your chance to build something that lasts. Not just a ranch, but a legacy. After she left, Elias sat alone in the kitchen, looking at the guardianship papers. His name. Clara's name. Ben's name. All official and legal and real. He thought about legacy, about what he'd leave behind when he was gone. Before, it would have been nothing, just a lonely ranch and a couple of graves nobody visited. But now he had children who'd carry his name, who'd remember him, who'd build their own lives on the foundation he could give them. The weight of that responsibility should have terrified him. Instead, it felt right, like the first thing that had made sense in 11 years. Clara appeared in the doorway, already in her nightgown. You okay? Yeah, just thinking. About what? About how much everything's changed, about what comes next. He looked at her. What do you want to do, Clara? With your life, I mean. When you're grown. She thought about it. I want to be a teacher, for kids like me and Ben. Kids who don't have anyone. Kids who need someone to believe in them. Then that's what you'll do. I'll make sure you get the education for it. You don't have to. I want to. You and Ben, you're not just mouths to feed anymore. You're my future, the thing I'm building for. He stood up and pulled her into a hug. Your mama wanted you to have chances. I'm going to make sure you get them. Clara hugged him back hard. I love you, Pa. The word hit him like a physical blow. Pa. Not Elias, not Mr. Crowley. Pa. I love you too, kid, he managed. She pulled back, smiling through tears. Ben's waiting for you. He wants you to tell him a story before bed. Elias found Ben in the small bedroom, already under the covers, his tin horse on the pillow beside him. The boy looked up with those solemn eyes. Story? He asked hopefully. Elias settled on the edge of the bed. What kind of story you want? A true one. About when you were little. So Elias told him about growing up on his father's ranch in Texas, about learning to ride, about the first time he'd helped with a cattle drive. Stories he hadn't thought about in decades came flooding back. His mother's cooking, his father's gruff affection, the brothers and sisters he'd lost touch with over the years. Ben listened with complete attention, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts. When Elias finally stopped, the boy was almost asleep, but he stirred enough to whisper, Tell more tomorrow? Every night if you want. Promise? I promise. Ben's hand found Elias's and held on. I'm glad you didn't ride past us. Me too, son. Me too. The days turned into weeks. The ranch transformed under their combined efforts. Clara learned to manage the household accounts, discovered she had a head for numbers. Ben learned to read, devouring every book Mrs. Delaney brought from town. Elias taught them both to ride properly, to work cattle, to fix fences, and mend harnesses. They were becoming a real family, learning each other's rhythms and quirks. Clara sang when she cooked, off-key but enthusiastic. Ben drew pictures of everything, the ranch, the animals, the three of them together. Elias found himself laughing more than he had in years, but there were hard moments too. Nights when Clara woke up screaming from nightmares about the men hunting them. Days when Ben went silent again, withdrawing into himself when the memories became too much. Times when Elias felt the old anger rising, the urge to ride to Omaha and finish what the Marshalls had started. They worked through it together, learning that healing wasn't a straight line, that some scars ran too deep to ever fully fade. One evening, 2 months after the trial, Elias sat Clara and Ben down at the kitchen table. He'd been planning this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. I got something to tell you both, he said. About my family, the one I lost. Clara's hand found his. You don't have to. I want to. He took a breath. Her name was Sarah, my wife. She was the best person I ever knew, kind and strong and patient with a fool like me. We got married young, built this ranch together. Then she got pregnant and we were so happy. Thought we had everything figured out. Ben climbed into his lap without asking. Elias held him automatically. But the birth went bad. Real bad. She lasted 3 days after Michael was born, just long enough to hold him. Then the fever took her. His voice cracked. And Michael, he was so small, so perfect, but he got sick too, couldn't fight it. I held him while he died, and then I buried them both out past the North Ridge. Clara was crying silently. Ben's small hand patted Elias's chest, trying to comfort him. After that, I just gave up. On everything. The ranch fell apart because I didn't care. I pushed everyone away because it hurt too much to let anyone close. I spent 11 years being angry at the world for taking them from me. He looked at both children. Until I found you two in that grass. And for the first time since Sarah died, I had a reason to fight again. We're not her, Clara whispered. We can't replace... You're not replacing anyone. You're... Elias struggled for the right words. You're the second chance I didn't deserve but got anyway. Sarah would have loved you both. Would have been proud of who you are and how you fight. And I think she'd be glad I found you. Glad I didn't stay broken forever. Ben looked up at him. Can we visit them? Mama Sarah and baby Michael? The question surprised Elias. He hadn't been to those graves in 11 years. Couldn't face them. But looking at Ben's hopeful face, he realized it was time. Yeah, he said. Yeah, we can do that. They rode out the next day, all three of them on horseback. The graves were on a small rise overlooking the valley, marked by wooden crosses Elias had carved himself. The wood was weathered now, the names barely legible. Elias dismounted and stood before them, Clara and Ben flanking him. Sarah, he said quietly. Michael, I brought some folks to meet you. This is Clara and Ben. They're mine now. My kids. I'm taking care of them like I couldn't take care of you." Clara knelt and touched Sarah's grave marker. "Thank you for loving him, for making him the kind of man who'd stop for 2 kids in the grass." Ben set his tin horse on Michael's grave. "So you have a toy to play with. If you get lonely," something in Elias's chest, something that had been locked tight for 11 years, finally broke open. He knelt between the graves and cried, really cried for the first time since the funerals. Clara and Ben wrapped their arms around him and held on while he shook with grief and release and gratitude. When he finally stopped, he felt lighter, like he'd been carrying a weight so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "I'll come back," he promised the graves. "Bring the kids regular. Keep the markers nice. You won't be forgotten." Ben retrieved his tin horse, and they rode back to the ranch together. The sun was setting, painting the prairie gold and red. The new barn stood solid against the sky. Smoke rose from the chimney where Clara had left stew cooking. Home. This was home now. Not the empty house he'd been haunting for 11 years, but a real home filled with life and noise and love. That night, after the kids were asleep, Elias sat on the porch and looked at the stars. He thought about the man he'd been, angry, alone, half dead inside. And the man he was becoming, father, guardian, someone with a future instead of just a past. The transformation hadn't been smooth or easy. He still had days where the old anger surfaced, where he wanted to solve problems with his fists instead of words. Still had moments where he felt like he didn't deserve this second chance. But Clara and Ben were teaching him patience, teaching him hope, teaching him that broken things could be mended if you were willing to do the work. He heard the door open and turned to see Ben standing there in his nightshirt, tin horse clutched to his chest. "Can't sleep?" Elias asked. Ben shook his head and climbed into Elias's lap. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen. "Pa," Ben said finally, "are we going to be okay forever now? No more bad men coming?" "Can't promise no more bad things will ever happen," Elias said honestly. "World's too unpredictable for that. But I can promise I'll be here. I'll fight for you. I'll protect you as long as I'm breathing." "That's good enough." Ben leaned his head against Elias's chest. "I feel safe with you." Those simple words meant more than any court judgment or legal paper ever could. They sat together until Ben fell asleep. Then Elias carried him inside and tucked him into bed. Clara was already asleep in the other room, one hand hanging off the mattress, completely relaxed in a way she never would have been a few months ago. His children, his family, his reason for everything. Elias checked the locks, banked the fire, and went to his own bed. For the first time in 11 years, he fell asleep without the weight of loneliness crushing his chest. Tomorrow they'd paint the barn red. Tomorrow they'd start planning for Clara's schooling. Tomorrow they'd keep building the life they'd fought so hard to protect. But tonight, they were just a family sleeping safe under one roof. And that was enough. 1 year later, the Crowley Ranch looked like a different place entirely. The barn stood tall and red. Ben had insisted on that shade, bright as a cardinal's wing, with straight walls and a roof that didn't leak. The pastures were green from careful irrigation. The cattle herd had doubled through good breeding and better management. Even the house had changed, with curtains in the windows and a vegetable garden out back that Clara tended with fierce pride. But the biggest changes weren't visible from the road. Elias stood at the stove making breakfast while Clara packed lunches for school, and Ben fed scraps to the 3 dogs that had somehow accumulated over the past months. The kitchen was loud with their chatter, with Ben's laughter, with Clara's off-key humming. The silence that had filled this house for 11 years was gone completely, replaced by the beautiful chaos of family. "Pa, did you see my arithmetic homework?" Clara called from the main room. "Mrs. Henderson wants to show it to the school board. She says I'm working at 10th grade level." "That's because you're smarter than most 10th graders," Elias said, flipping eggs. "Check by your bed. You were studying late last night." "Found it." Ben appeared at Elias's elbow, tugging on his sleeve. "Can I ride Duke to the north pasture after school? I want to check on the new calf." "If your chores are done first. And take Clara with you." "I'm always with Clara," Ben complained, but without real annoyance. At 6 years old, he was still small for his age, but growing stronger every month. His voice had settled into regular use, though he still went quiet when he was nervous or overwhelmed. Can't I go by myself? I'm not a baby. No, but you're 6. When you're 8, we'll talk about solo rides. Ben grumbled but accepted it. That was another change. The boy had opinions now, preferences, the confidence to argue when he thought something was unfair. It was exactly what Elias had hoped for. Clara came into the kitchen already dressed for school, her hair braided neat, her face scrubbed clean. She'd grown 3 inches in the past year and was starting to look more like a young woman than a girl. It terrified Elias in ways he couldn't quite articulate. "Remember, I'm staying late today," she said, grabbing her lunch. "Mrs. Henderson wants me to help the younger kids with their reading." "I'll pick you both up at 4, Elias confirmed. "We could walk home. It's only 3 miles. 4 o'clock. Clara rolled her eyes, but smiled. They'd had this argument a dozen times. Elias knew he was being overprotective, knew Clara was capable of walking home on her own, but some fears didn't respond to logic. The memory of finding her in the grass, hunted and terrified, still woke him up some nights. They ate breakfast together at the table, arguing about whether Ben needed a haircut and if Clara should enter the county spelling competition. Normal family arguments, the kind Elias had thought he'd never have again. After the kids left for school, Clara walking, Ben riding his pony with strict instructions to stay on the road, Elias headed into town for supplies. Clearwater had grown in the past year, with new businesses opening to serve the railroad workers who'd started arriving. The town that had once barely noticed Elias now greeted him by name. "Morning, Elias," Mrs. Delaney called from her store. "How are those children?" "Getting too smart for their own good," he said, meaning it as a compliment. "That's Clara's doing. She's been reading every book I can get my hands on." Mrs. Delaney lowered her voice. "There's talk of sending her to the Territorial Academy next year. Full scholarship. Mrs. Henderson's been making inquiries." Elias felt pride and terror in equal measure. She's only 14, and already smarter than half the teachers. That girl's going places, Elias. You should be thinking about her future. He was. Constantly. Clara deserved opportunities he'd never had, but the thought of her leaving, even for school, made his chest tight. At the post office, he picked up a letter from the territorial court. His hands shook slightly as he opened it. Old habits died hard, and official letters still made him nervous. But this one was good news. The final adoption papers had been approved. Clara May Crowley and Benjamin James Crowley were legally, officially, permanently his children. No guardian status, no temporary arrangements. His. Elias sat down on the post office steps and read the letter 3 times, letting it sink in. A year ago, he'd been a lonely drunk with a bullet in his side. Now he was a father with legal papers to prove it. "You look like you got good news," Sheriff Hackett said, walking past. "Best news." Elias showed him the letter. Hackett grinned. "Congratulations. Those kids deserve you, and you deserve them." He paused. "Speaking of deserving, you hear about Vale and Hale?" "Not in a while." "They still in prison?" "Hale got 15 years for fraud and conspiracy. Federal judge threw the book at him. Vale got 5 years as accessory, but word is he's not doing well. Guilt eating him alive, apparently." Hackett's expression was grim. "Some men can live with what they've done. Others can't." Elias thought about that as he loaded supplies into his wagon. He'd done things he wasn't proud of. Killed men, made hard choices, lived angry for too long. But he was learning that guilt was only useful if it changed you, if it made you better. Vale's guilt was sterile, selfish. He felt bad about what he'd done but hadn't learned anything from it. Elias's guilt had made him fight harder for Clara and Ben, had made him a better father, had given him the strength to change from the man he'd been into the man they needed. That was the difference. On the way home, he stopped at the graves on the North Ridge. He'd been keeping his promise, visiting Sarah and Michael regularly, bringing Clara and Ben with him sometimes. The wooden crosses had been replaced with proper stone markers that Elias had commissioned from a mason in Omaha. They looked permanent now, respected. "Sarah," he said quietly, kneeling between the graves, "got the final adoption papers today. They're really mine now, legal and everything." He pulled a weed that had sprouted near Michael's stone. "I know you can't answer, but I hope you'd approve. Hope you'd think I'm doing right by them." The wind rustled through the prairie grass. Elias chose to take it as agreement. "Clara's getting so smart it scares me. She's reading law books now, understanding things I never could. And Ben, he's drawing pictures that look real as photographs. They're going to do things, Sarah, important things. Things we never got the chance to do. He sat there for a while longer, talking to his first family about his second one, feeling the connection between them. These graves didn't make him sad anymore. They made him grateful for the time he'd had with Sarah and Michael, and for the second chance Clara and Ben represented. When he got home, he found a surprise waiting. Silas Hendricks was in the yard with two other ranchers, examining the barn. "Silas, what's going on?" "Got a proposition for you, Crowley." The old rancher gestured to the others. "We're forming a cattlemen's association. Pool our resources for roundups, share grazing rights on open range, negotiate better prices at market. We want you in." Elias blinked. "Me? You got a good head for breeding, your herd's healthy, and you're honest. That counts for something." Silas pulled out a paper. "We're dividing the valley into sections. Your property sits right in the middle, which makes it valuable for organizing drives. You'd get a percentage of profits plus voting rights in the association." It was the kind of opportunity Elias would have ignored a year ago. Would have said he worked alone, didn't need partners, didn't want complications. But he thought about Clara's education fund and Ben's future and the security they'd need. "I'm in," he said. "On one condition. When Clara's old enough, she gets a voice in the association too. She's got a better head for numbers than any of us." The ranchers exchanged glances. A woman in a cattlemen's association was unusual. But Silas just shrugged. "If she's as sharp as you say, we'd be fools not to use that brain. Deal." They shook on it. Another piece of the future falling into place. That evening, Elias picked up the kids from school as promised. Ben bounded out talking about the frog he'd found at recess. Clara emerged more slowly, deep in conversation with Mrs. Henderson about a book on territorial law. "Did you know women can own property in this territory?" Clara said excitedly on the ride home. "And vote in school board elections? Mrs. Henderson says the laws are changing, that women might get full voting rights in our lifetime." "You thinking about politics?" Elias asked. "Maybe. Or law. Or teaching." Clara's eyes were bright. "There's so much I could do, Pa. So many things I want to learn." "Then you'll learn them. All of them." At home, Elias made them sit down at the kitchen table. He pulled out the adoption papers and spread them flat. "Got something to show you both." Clara read them first, her eyes going wide. Then she covered her mouth with both hands. "We're really Crowley's, really mine, forever and legal." Elias looked between them. "I know you were already using the name, but now it's official. No one can take you away. No one can challenge it. You're my children." Ben climbed into Elias's lap and hugged him hard. Clara came around the table and wrapped her arms around both of them, crying happy tears. "Does this mean we can call you Pa in front of everyone?" Ben asked. "Not just at home?" "You can call me Pa anywhere you want, son. Even at school? Especially at school." They sat like that for a long time, holding each other, letting the reality sink in. A year ago, they'd been strangers bound by desperation. Now they were family bound by law and love and choice. That choice mattered. Elias had learned that over the past year. Blood didn't make a family. Commitment did. Showing up every day did. Fighting for each other did. Choosing to stay when leaving would be easier did. He'd chosen them. They'd chosen him. And that choice, renewed every morning, was what made them real. Over the following months, the ranch continued to thrive. The Cattlemen's Association proved profitable, with Elias's property becoming a central hub for organizing drives. Clara started taking on bookkeeping for several ranchers, earning money that went straight into her education fund. Ben discovered a talent for training horses, gentling the wildest animals with patience and intuition. They had arguments, of course. Clara tested boundaries, staying out late or talking back when she thought Elias was being unfair. Ben went through a phase of nightmares, reliving the trauma of being hunted. Elias struggled with letting them be independent, with trusting they'd be safe out of his sight. But they worked through it. Learned that family meant staying even when things were hard, meant apologizing when you were wrong and forgiving when someone hurt you. One evening in late summer, Elias found Clara on the porch, reading a letter, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately alert. "Nothing's wrong. This is—" She handed him the letter. "It's from the Territorial Academy. They're offering me a full scholarship starting next fall. Room, board, tuition, everything." Elias read the letter twice. "This is incredible, Clara. You did it." "But it's in the capital, 300 miles away. I'd only be home for summers and holidays. Clara's voice cracked. I don't know if I can leave you and Ben. Elias pulled her close. Hey, this is what we've been working for. This is your future. What if something happens while I'm gone? What if Ben needs me? What if you... We'll be fine. And you'll come home for visits, and you'll write letters. He tilted her face up so she met his eyes. Clara, your mama wanted you to have opportunities. She died making sure you'd have the money for education. You think I'm going to let you waste that because you're worried about me? But no buts. You're going to that academy. You're going to learn everything they can teach you. And then you're coming back here and using that education to make this territory better. His voice was firm. That's not a request. That's an order. Clara laughed through her tears. You can't order me. I'm 14. Watch me. She hugged him tight. Thank you, Pa. For everything. For stopping in that grass. For fighting for us. For making me believe I could be more than a scared kid running from her uncle. You were always more than that. I just made sure you survived long enough to figure it out. When Ben heard the news, he was less philosophical. You're leaving? His voice went small and scared. Not forever, Clara said, kneeling in front of him. Just for school. I'll be back for summer, and I'll write you letters every week. But who's going to help me with reading? Who's going to... Pa will help you, and Mrs. Henderson. And you're getting so good you'll probably be helping the little kids soon. Clara pulled him close. I'm not abandoning you, Ben. I'm never abandoning you. I'm just going to learn things so I can come back and help more people. Help kids like us who need someone to fight for them. Ben was quiet for a long time. Then, you're going to be a teacher, like you said? Maybe, or a lawyer, someone who helps people. Okay? Ben's voice was steadier now. But you have to write every week and come home for my birthday. Every week and every birthday, I promise. The year turned toward fall. The ranch prepared for winter with full stores and a solid barn and enough cattle to ensure they'd be comfortable. Clara got ready for the academy, nervous and excited in equal measure. Ben started first grade, his reading improving daily. Elias watched them grow and change and become themselves. Watched Clara transform from a scared girl into a confident young woman with plans and dreams. Watched Ben go from silent and traumatized to a cheerful boy who laughed easily and spoke his mind. And he felt himself changing too. The anger that had defined him for 11 years was almost gone, replaced by something steadier, purpose, love, hope. He still had bad days. Days when the old grief surfaced or the memories of violence crept in. Days when he wondered if he was doing this father thing right, if he was enough for these kids who'd already lost so much. But Clara and Ben pulled him through those days, just like he pulled them through theirs. That's what family did. One October evening, Elias took them both up to the North Ridge at sunset. The three of them sat on the hill overlooking the ranch, the valley spreading golden and red below them. Why'd you bring us up here? Clara asked. Just wanted you to see what we built, what we fought for. Elias gestured at the ranch, the red barn, the house with smoke rising from the chimney, the cattle grazing peacefully in the pasture. A year and a half ago, this place was falling apart because I didn't care if it lived or died. Now look at it. It's beautiful, Ben said quietly. It's home, Clara corrected. That's better than beautiful. They watched the sun drop toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of fire and gold. Can I tell you something? Elias said. When I found you two in that grass, bleeding and half dead, I thought I was saving you. Thought I was the hero riding in to rescue the helpless kids. You were, Ben said loyally. No, I mean, maybe at first, but the truth is... Elias had to stop and clear his throat. The truth is you two saved me. I was already dead inside, had been for 11 years, just waiting for my body to figure it out. But you gave me a reason to keep breathing, to fix this place up, to be better than the angry, broken man I'd become. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. We saved each other then. Yeah, I guess we did. Is that why you stopped at those graves on the way up here? Ben asked. He was more observant than people gave him credit for. Part of it. Wanted to tell Sarah and Michael about you, about how you changed everything. Elias looked at the stone markers barely visible in the fading light. They'd like you both. Sarah would have loved how smart you are, Clara, how fierce, and Michael would have been a good big brother to you, Ben, would have taught you things, protected you. Do you miss them? Ben asked. Every day, but not the same way I used to. Used to miss them like a wound that wouldn't heal. Now I miss them like remembering something good that happened. Sad it's over, but grateful it happened at all. That's because you're happy now, Clara said. Grief changes when you've got reasons to smile again. She was right. Elias had learned that happiness didn't erase loss. It just made the loss bearable. He could love Sarah's memory and love Clara and Ben, could honor what he'd lost while celebrating what he'd found. The sun touched the horizon, spilling red and gold across the prairie. Clara, Elias said, when you go to that academy, you remember something. You're not just going for yourself. You're going for every kid who got told they couldn't, for your mama who wanted you to have chances, for Ben who's going to watch what you do and learn that he can do big things too. That's a lot of pressure, Pa. You can handle it. You handled worse at 13. Clara smiled. Yeah, I guess I did. And Ben, Elias continued, you keep being exactly who you are. Keep drawing those pictures, keep gentling horses, keep talking even when it's hard. You're going to do important things too. Maybe not the same kind of important as Clara, but just as valuable. What if I just want to stay here? Ben asked. Work the ranch with you? Then that's what you do. There's no shame in that. This land is yours as much as mine. But I want you to know you've got choices. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. Ben nodded seriously, filing that away. They sat until the stars came out, 3 people who'd found each other by chance and chosen each other by design. 3 people who'd been broken in different ways and had somehow fit together into something whole. We should head back, Clara said finally. It's getting cold. As they rode down from the ridge, Ben started singing, a song he'd learned at school about cowboys and cattle drives. His voice was sweet and clear in the darkness. Clara joined in, slightly off-key as always. Elias added his own rough baritone. They sounded terrible together. It was perfect. Back at the ranch, they ate dinner by lamplight, arguing cheerfully about whether Ben needed new boots or if his current ones could last another month. Clara did homework while Ben drew pictures of horses. Elias repaired a bridle that had broken that afternoon. Ordinary moments. The kind that made up a life. Before bed, Clara stopped Elias in the hallway. Pa, I was thinking, when I finish at the academy, I want to come back here. Open a school for kids who can't afford regular education. Kids like me and Ben were. Is that stupid? That's the least stupid thing I've ever heard. Elias pulled her into a hug. Your mama would be so proud of the woman you're becoming. You think so? I know so. After the kids were asleep, Elias sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, looking at the stars. He thought about the long road that had brought him here, the grief, the anger, the loneliness, the chance encounter in the grass that had changed everything, the fights and fires and legal battles, the slow transformation from broken man to devoted father. It hadn't been smooth, hadn't been easy. He'd made mistakes, lost his temper, been too protective or not protective enough. He was still learning how to be a father, still figuring out how to balance letting them be independent with keeping them safe. But he was trying. And that, he'd learned, was what mattered. The door opened and Ben appeared, rubbing his eyes. Can't sleep again. Just thinking. Come here. Ben climbed into his lap, fitting perfectly in the space between Elias's arms. What are you thinking about? About how lucky I am. About how close I came to riding past you and Clara that day. Elias tightened his arms around his son. About how my whole life changed because I decided to be a little less selfish and a little more human. I'm glad you stopped, Ben said sleepily. Me too, son. Me too. They sat together in the darkness, father and son, bound by choice and love, and the simple decision to stay when leaving would have been easier. The prairie wind blew across the ranch, carrying the scent of grass and cattle and home. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and beautiful. And Elias Crowley, who'd spent 11 years waiting to die, felt more alive than he had in decades, because that's what family did. It pulled you back from the edge. It gave you reasons to fight. It reminded you that broken things could be mended if someone cared enough to do the work. He'd been broken. Clara had been broken. Ben had been broken. But together, somehow, they'd made something whole. Not perfect. They still had scars, still had hard days, still made mistakes, but whole in the ways that mattered. Whole enough to face whatever came next. Ben fell asleep against his chest. Elias carried him inside and tucked him into bed, then checked on Clara. She was asleep with a book on her chest, already dreaming about the future she was building, his children, his family, his second chance. Elias stood in the doorway between their rooms, watching them sleep, and thought about the question people sometimes asked him. Usually folks who didn't know the full story, who saw him in town with 2 kids and wondered about the woman who wasn't there. "How'd you end up with them?" they'd ask. The simple answer was that he'd found them in the grass and decided to help. But the real answer was more complicated. He'd ended up with them because he'd been lonely enough to listen when a girl screamed, desperate enough to fight when fighting meant dying, broken enough to recognize other broken things, and just barely human enough to choose being a father over being a ghost. He'd ended up with them because sometimes mercy looked like stopping when you should keep riding. Sometimes strength looked like protecting someone weaker. Sometimes healing looked like letting other people's joy pull you out of your own grief. He'd ended up with them because he'd needed saving just as much as they had, and they'd all saved each other. That was the truth of it. That was the story he'd tell them when they were older, when they asked him why he'd taken in 2 strangers and upended his entire life. Because that's what family did. It chose you when you needed choosing. It fought for you when you couldn't fight alone. It gave you a reason to be better than your worst self. Elias closed the doors quietly and went to his own room. Tomorrow they'd paint the fence. Clara would help Ben with his arithmetic. They'd check the north pasture together. Ordinary moments that added up to a life. A good life. Not the one he'd planned, not the one he'd thought he deserved after losing Sarah and Michael, but a good life nonetheless. He lay down in bed and closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of his children breathing in the next rooms. The house creaked and settled around them, no longer empty, no longer silent. And Elias Crowley, former ghost, current father, fell asleep thinking about the future instead of the past. Because that's what happened when you stopped running from grief and started building something new from the wreckage. You didn't forget what you'd lost. You just made room for what you'd found. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, what you found was even better than what you'd been searching for. Sometimes it was 2 kids in the grass who needed a hero. Sometimes it was becoming that hero when you'd thought you had nothing left to give. Sometimes it was learning that the only thing separating the lost from the saved was someone willing to stop when everyone else rode past. And sometimes that someone was you.